Michael Carter shot a man dead in his own living room and never stopped smiling. The blood was still spreading across the white marble when he turned to his wife Emily and asked if dinner was ready. She stood frozen, one hand pressed against her stomach, hiding a secret that would soon rip their entire world apart. In that single moment, she understood something no wife should ever have to learn. The man she married was not a monster who hid his violence. He was a monster who expected her to smile back at him while it was still warm. Before we go any further, if you love stories about love, betrayal, and the choices that change everything, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because you will not believe how it turns. And do me one small favor. Leave a comment telling me the name of the city where you are watching from right now, so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. Now let us begin. Emily Carter had learned to count the seconds between the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway and the moment the front doors of the Carter estate swung open. 9 seconds. That was how long she had to arrange her face. 9 seconds to pull her lips into something that resembled a smile, to soften her eyes to become the woman her husband believed he had married. She had gotten very good at it. 3 years of practice will do that to a person. Tonight, though, her hands were shaking too badly to hide. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, gripping the polished banister so hard her knuckles had gone white, and she listened to the men shouting in the room below. She could not see them from where she stood, but she did not need to. She knew every voice by now. She knew the low, calm one that never rose, never cracked, never broke. That was Michael. And she knew that when Michael's voice stayed that calm, someone was about to die. Please, a stranger's voice was begging down there. Please, Mr. Carter, I have a family. I have kids. I didn't know it was your shipment. I swear to God, I didn't know. I believe you, Michael said gently. And then the gunshot came and Emily flinched so hard she nearly fell. She pressed her palm flat against her mouth to keep the sound in. She had promised herself long ago that she would never let them hear her crying. Crying was weakness, and weakness in this house was a currency, and everyone was always counting. Below her, she heard Michael sigh the way a tired man sighs after a long day at an ordinary job. Get that off my floor, he said to someone. Rosa is going to have a heart attack when she sees this, and she just mopped. Someone laughed. Someone actually laughed. Emily turned and walked quickly back down the hall to her bedroom, and she did not stop until the heavy door was closed and locked behind her. Then she slid down the length of it until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, and she rocked herself very slowly back and forth. There was a soft knock at the door a few minutes later. 2 quick taps, then a pause, then one more. Their signal. It's me, a warm voice whispered through the wood. It's just me, honey, let me in. Emily reached up and turned the lock, and the door opened, and Rosa slipped inside. Rosa was the kitchen maid, a big, soft, round woman in her 50s, with flour permanently dusted into the creases of her hands, and a heart far too kind for a house like this one. She had wide hips and a wide face and the sort of arms that had held 100 crying people, and right now she opened those arms, and Emily walked straight into them. I heard it, Emily whispered. I heard him. He killed a man right downstairs, Rosa, and then he made a joke about the floor. I know, baby. I know. Rosa held her tighter. Don't you listen to those things. You don't belong to those things. But I do, Emily said, and her voice cracked. That's the whole problem. I do belong to this. I married it. I stood in a white dress and I promised my whole life to it, and now I can't get it off me. It's in my hair. It's in my skin. It's everywhere. Rosa pulled back and held Emily's face in both her warm hands and looked at her with those steady brown eyes. You listen to me now, she said. You are not this house. You hear me? A person can live in a cage and still not be a bird that belongs in a cage. Emily laughed, but it came out broken. You always talk in riddles. My mother talked in riddles. I inherited them along with the hips. Rosa smiled, and then the smile faded. Emily, there's something in your face tonight. Something new. What is it? And Emily, who had held the secret for exactly 6 days, who had told no one, who had barely let herself believe, it opened her mouth to answer and found that she could not. She just shook her head. It's nothing, she said. I'm tired, that's all. Rosa studied her for a long moment. She had raised 4 children of her own and buried a husband, and she knew the shape of a lie when she saw one. But she also knew when a secret was too heavy to be pulled out before its time. So she just nodded and patted Emily's cheek. All right, she said. But when you're ready to say it out loud, you come find me. Day or night, I don't care what hour it is, you come find me." Emily nodded and Rosa gathered her up in one more crushing hug, and then she went back downstairs to clean up what the men had left behind. The secret was this. 6 days ago, Emily had been sick to her stomach for the third morning in a row, and something in the back of her mind had gone very quiet and very still. She had waited until Michael left for the city, and she had sent the driver away, and she had walked 2 miles to a drugstore where nobody knew her name, and she had bought a small pink box and hidden it inside her coat like it was a weapon. She had taken the test in the guest bathroom on the third floor, the one nobody ever used, and she had set it on the edge of the sink, and she had waited, and she had watched 2 lines appear where she had prayed there would only be one. She was pregnant. She was going to have a baby. And she had sat down on the cold tile floor of that guest bathroom, and she had cried, but not the way a woman is supposed to cry when she learns she is going to be a mother. She had cried the way a person cries when they see a car coming toward them and they cannot move out of the way. Because Emily knew this house. She knew what a child born into this house would become. She had seen the young men Michael surrounded himself with, boys who had been raised in this life, boys who had learned to hold a gun before they learned to drive. She had seen how their eyes went flat and dead by the time they were 20. She had watched Michael take a scared teenager and mold him into a killer over the course of a single summer, and she had watched that boy start calling her husband father as if it were the greatest honor in the world. She would not let that happen to her child. She would rather die. That was the thought that had been growing in her like a second heartbeat for 6 days. She would rather die than let her baby be born into this. Downstairs, the front doors opened and closed, and this time it was not a stranger. This time it was Michael coming up. Emily heard his footsteps in the hall, slow and heavy and sure, and she scrambled up off the floor and threw herself into the chair by the window and grabbed a book off the side table and held it open in front of her, upside down, and she did not even notice it was upside down until the door opened. "There you are," Michael said. She looked up, and there he was, filling the doorway the way he filled every room he ever walked into. Michael Carter was a handsome man, and that was almost the cruelest part of it. If he had looked like a monster, it would have been easier. But he had dark, kind eyes and a slow, warm smile, and hands that had held her so gently on their wedding night that she had wept, and those same hands had an hour ago taken a man's life on the marble floor downstairs. "I was reading," she said. He crossed the room and knelt beside her. Sharon took her free hand in both of his, and he pressed his lips to her knuckles, and she made herself not pull away. "You heard," he said quietly. It was not a question. "I heard. I'm sorry." He looked up at her, and the terrible thing was that he meant it. "I never wanted this part of my life to touch you. I keep it away from you. I keep everything away from you. But sometimes the world comes into my house, whether I invite it or not." He was begging Michael. "I know." He said he had children. Michael's jaw tightened just slightly. "They all say that. It's the first thing they learn to say. It doesn't make it true, and even when it is true, it doesn't change what has to happen." He kissed her hand again. "You don't understand this world, Emily. I don't want you to understand it. The day you understand it is the day I've lost you, because no one who understands it can love the man who runs it." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and she thought, "You have already lost me. You lost me a long time ago. You just haven't noticed yet." "I love you," he said. "You know that. You're the only clean thing I have left. The only thing in my whole life I never had to threaten or buy or bury. I need you to stay clean for me. Can you do that?" "Yes," she whispered, and it was the biggest lie she had ever told. He smiled then, that slow, warm smile, and he stood and kissed the top of her head. "Good," he said, "because Saturday is our anniversary. 3 years. I'm throwing a party, the biggest one we've ever had. Every family on the East Coast is going to be in this house, and they are all going to see that Michael Carter has a queen, and that his queen is loyal, and that his house is strong. I need you to be beautiful, and I need you to smile, and I need you to make me proud. Can you do that for me?" And Emily, whose whole body was one long, silent scream, looked up at her husband and said, "Of course I can." When he left the room, she sat very still for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and slid to the floor once again, and she thought about the party. Every family on the East Coast in this house. Guards everywhere, guests everywhere, chaos everywhere, everyone watching everyone. Michael pulled in 100 directions at once, distracted by 100 conversations, 100 threats, 100 deals. There would never be a better night to disappear. The idea arrived fully formed the way the most dangerous ideas always do, and once it had arrived, she could not unthink it. She pressed both hands over her stomach, over the tiny secret life that had not asked to be born into any of this, and she made a promise out loud so quietly that even the walls could not have heard it. "I will get you out," she whispered. "I don't care what it costs me. I will get you somewhere the guns can't reach. I swear it to you. I swear it on my life." That was Wednesday. The party was Saturday. She had 3 days. The planning began that very night, and it began the way all of Emily's rebellions had to begin, in silence, in secret, in the hours when the house finally slept. She lay in bed next to Michael, and she listened to his breathing slow and deepen. And when she was sure, absolutely sure that he was gone, she slid out from under the sheets and crept to the walk-in closet, and she began. She had, over the years, saved money. Not much at first. A few $100s slipped from the household accounts, folded small, and hidden inside the lining of a winter coat she never wore. Then more. Cash she was given for shopping trips that she reported spent. Bills tucked into the toes of old shoes, into the pages of books she pretended to read, into a slit she had carefully cut in the back of a jewelry box and sewn shut again. Over 3 years, it had grown dollar by frightened dollar into just under $40,000. She had told herself that it was nothing, a woman's silly savings. She had never once admitted even to herself what she was really building. She was building a door out. Now she pulled the money from all its hiding places and counted it in the dark, her lips moving silently, and when she was done, she sat back on her heels and pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from making a sound, because $40,000 was both everything she had and almost nothing at all. It would have to be enough. It would have to buy silence, distance, a new name, a new life. The new name was the hardest part, and it was the part she could not do alone. The next morning, she found Rosa in the kitchen, up to her elbows in dough, and she waited until the other staff had cleared out, and then she came and stood very close to the big woman and pretended to help her knead. "Rosa," she said so quietly, her lips barely moved, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise me that no matter what your answer is, you will never repeat that I asked." Rosa's hands stopped moving in the dough. She did not look up. She had been in this house a long time, and she knew how to have a dangerous conversation without letting her face give it away. "Ask," she said. "I need papers," Emily whispered. "A new name, a birth certificate, a license, a passport if it can be done. And I need it fast, and I need it clean, and I need it to be for someone Michael has never heard of." For a long moment, Rosa said nothing. She just kept her eyes on the dough, and her big shoulders rose and fell. With one slow breath, "You're pregnant," she finally said. It was not a question either. Emily's whole body went cold. "How did you?" "I've buried a husband and raised 4 babies and lost one before he was born. God rest him." Rosa's voice was very soft and very steady. "I know the walk of a pregnant woman. I've known for a week. I was just waiting for you to trust me enough to say it." Emily's eyes filled, and she blinked hard, and one tear got away from her anyway and fell into the flour. "I can't let it be born here," she whispered. "I can't, Rosa. You understand. Of all the people in the world, you understand what this house does to children." And Rosa, who had watched this family for years, who had seen exactly what Emily had seen, closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there was something fierce in them. "My cousin's boy," she said so low that Emily had to lean in to hear it, "in Queens. He does documents for people who need to disappear. Good work. The best. He's helped a lot of women who needed to get away from men worse than yours, if you can believe there's worse than yours." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It'll cost you. And it'll take me a day to reach him and a day for him to work. You don't have much time." "The party," Emily breathed. "Saturday. That's when I go." Rosa nodded slowly. "Then I'll have it to you Friday night," she said. "But Emily, look at me now." She turned and took the younger woman's face in her flour-dusted hands the way she had 100 times before. "If you do this, there's no coming back. You understand me? This isn't a woman leaving a bad marriage. This is a woman leaving Michael Carter. If he ever finds you, he will not forgive you. Love like his doesn't forgive, it only owns. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understand, Emily said. Then God go with you, Rosa whispered, and she kissed Emily's forehead, and it felt like a benediction and a goodbye all at once. The days that followed were the longest of Emily's life. She moved through the great cold house like a ghost, smiling when smiles were required, laughing when laughter was expected, planning the seating chart for the anniversary party with the estate manager while her mind ran through routes and exits and lies. She had studied the house for 3 years without ever admitting to herself why. She knew the service quarters, the narrow, ugly hallways the staff used, the ones that ran behind the beautiful walls where the guests never went. She knew that one of them ended at a delivery door at the back of the kitchen, and she knew that on the night of a party, that door would be propped open constantly for caterers coming in and out. And she knew that just beyond it, past the trash bins in the loading area, was a low stone wall, and beyond that wall was the road. If she could get from the ballroom to that door without being stopped, she could be gone before anyone knew to look. Michael, in the meantime, was distracted exactly as she had prayed he would be. The party had become a matter of enormous importance to him, a show of power for men who measured everything by shows of power, and rival families had begun to make noise. And there were security concerns, and there were guest lists to argue over, and there were men in and out of his study at all hours. He barely saw her. When he did, he was tender in the distracted way of a man whose mind is elsewhere. He kissed her, told her she was beautiful, told her he could not wait to show her off, and swept out of the room. He suspected nothing. Why would he? For 3 years, she had been the one perfectly loyal thing in a world of betrayal. It would never occur to him that the betrayal he could not see coming would come from her. There was one bad moment. Thursday night, she was moving the cash from the closet into the false bottom of a small overnight bag when Michael came home 2 hours earlier than she expected, and she heard his footsteps in the hall, and she had bills spread across the bed like a confession, and her heart stopped completely. She swept the money under the duvet with both arms just as the door opened, and she was still half bent over the bed when he walked in, and he stopped and looked at her strangely. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I couldn't find my earring," she said, and her voice was so light and so easy that she astonished herself. "The pearl one, I think it fell in the bed." He crossed the room, and for one white-hot second, she was certain he was going to pull back the covers and find $40,000 in cash and know everything. But instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Forget the pearls," he said, and he opened the box, and inside was a necklace of diamonds so bright it hurt to look at. "Wear these on Saturday. I want every man in that room to know what I'd burn the world down to protect." And Emily looked at that necklace, and she looked at her husband's face so full of love and so full of blood, and she understood him completely in that moment. He did not love her the way a person loves another person. He loved her the way a man loves a thing he owns. She was the diamonds. She was the proof that he had won. "It's beautiful," she said, and she let him fasten it around her throat, and it sat there cold against her skin like a collar, and she smiled at him in the mirror, while under the covers behind them lay the money that would carry her away. "You're crying," he said, watching her in the mirror. "I'm happy," she lied. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder, and looked at the two of them in the glass, and for one long moment they stood there, the killer and the woman planning to run, and to anyone in the world they would have looked like love. "3 years," he murmured. "You've made me a better man, Emily. I don't say it enough. Before you, I was just power. You gave me something to protect. You gave me a reason." He tightened his arms. "I would never survive losing you. You know that, don't you? Whatever it took, I would burn every city in this country to the ground before I let anyone take you from me." And Emily, standing in the circle of his arms with his diamonds at her throat and his child in her body and his enemies at his gates, understood exactly how much danger she was truly in. "You'll never lose me," she whispered. Friday night, the papers came. Rosa brought them up, wrapped inside a folded tablecloth, tucked between fresh linens, as if she were simply doing her rounds, and she slipped into Emily's room in the small hours and laid them out on the bed with hands that trembled slightly. A driver's license, a birth certificate, a passport, and a name. "Sarah Miller," Emily read aloud very quietly. She touched the photograph on the license, her own face taken from an old picture Rosa had somehow gotten to her cousin's boy, they altered just enough. "Sarah Miller. It's a good name, Rosa said. It's a name nobody looks at twice. That's what you want. You don't want a beautiful name anymore. You want an invisible one. Emily gathered the papers to her chest and held them like they were the child she was carrying. Then she looked up at Rosa, and both women knew this was the last time they would ever stand in this room together. I don't know how to thank you, Emily said, and her voice broke on the last word. Don't thank me, Rosa said gruffly, but her own eyes were wet. You just live. You get out there, and you live a big, loud, ordinary life, the kind nobody in this house ever gets to have. You raise that baby somewhere with a art and a bow and a school with a slide out front, and nobody with a gun ever comes to the door. That's how you thank me. You go be free enough for the both of us. They held each other for a long time, and then Rosa pulled back and did something she had never done before. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper and pressed it into Emily's hand. An address, she said, a church in a little town in Pennsylvania. There's a woman there, Sister Agnes. She helps women like you, women who are running. You get to her, and she'll help you get further and further until you're so far he can't ever reach you. You memorize that address, and then you burn it. Tonight. You understand? Memorize it and burn it. Emily memorized it, and she burned it. Saturday came. The house woke up screaming with the activity before dawn. Caterers, florists, an army of extra staff, security men in black suits with earpieces walking the grounds. Cars arriving all day to unload chairs and glasses and flowers and ice. By afternoon, the estate did not even feel like a home anymore. It felt like a fortress preparing for a coronation, which in a way it was. Emily spent the day being made beautiful. Her hair was arranged, her face was painted, she was poured into a gown the color of deep red wine, and Michael's diamonds were fastened at her throat, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she did not see herself at all. She saw a queen. She saw exactly what he wanted the world to see. Underneath it all, strapped to the inside of her thigh with a garter, was a plastic bag holding the fake documents and the burner phone. And in a small clutch that never left her wrist was a first small stack of cash, enough to get her started with the rest already hidden in a bag by the delivery door where Rosa had stashed it that morning. At 6 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. They came in armored cars and they came with bodyguards, and they came dripping in the wealth of the American underworld. Old men with dead eyes and young men with hungry ones. Wives in furs and mistresses in silk. They filled the ballroom and the terrace and the grand hall, and the whole enormous house began to hum with a low, dangerous energy, the energy of 100 predators forced to be polite to one another under one roof. And in the middle of it all stood Michael, magnificent, terrifying, gracious, shaking hands and clapping shoulders, and letting every single man in that room feel for just a moment the warmth of his approval and the weight of his threat. And at his side stood Emily, his queen, his prize, his diamonds, smiling and smiling and smiling. Beautiful, the old men told him, looking at her. Yes, Michael agreed, his hand resting warm and heavy at the small of her back. She is. They did not know they were looking at a woman who was at that very moment counting the guards by the front doors, counting the ones on the terrace, counting the minutes until the toast, which was when every eye in the house would be on Michael, which was when she would slip away. She played her part perfectly. She laughed at jokes she did not hear. She let herself be admired. She held a glass of champagne she never once drank because there was a life inside her now, and she would protect that life even from a single sip. And she waited. Twice her nerve nearly broke. The first time was when a rival boss, a heavy old man named Salvatore with a voice like gravel, leaned in too close and said to Michael loud enough for her to hear, "A woman like this, Michael, you should keep her chained up. A treasure like this, someone will always want to steal it." And he had laughed, and Michael had laughed, but Michael's hand had tightened on her back until it hurt. And she had understood the truth underneath the joke, which was that she was a thing. And things get stolen, and a man protects his things with violence. The second time was worse. She was crossing the hall to take her position for the toast when a young guard she did not recognize stepped into her path. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "are you feeling all right? You look pale." And Emily's heart stopped because she thought he knows somehow he knows, and she opened her mouth and no words came out. "She's fine," said a warm voice behind her, and there was Rosa appearing out of nowhere the way she always did, sliding a steadying hand under Emily's elbow. "She's just tired, big night. I'm taking her to sit down for a minute. You go on and do your job, young man." And the guard nodded and stepped aside, and Rosa steered Emily away, and under her breath, so quietly it might have been a prayer, he said, "It's almost time. When the old man Salvatore stands to make his toast, that's your minute. Everyone will be looking at him and looking at Michael. You go then, not before. You hear me? Not 1 second before." "I hear you," Emily whispered. Bags by the delivery door under the third linen cart. Money's inside a bag of dinner rolls. Nobody checks bread. Rosa squeezed her arm hard enough to bruise. "This is goodbye, baby. I'm not going to look at you again after this, because if I look at you, I'll cry. And if I cry, somebody will ask why. So I'm going to let go of your arm now and walk into that kitchen, and I'm never going to see your face again in this life. And I want you to know it was the great honor of my old life to love you. Now go stand where you're supposed to stand and wait for the old man to raise his glass." And then she let go, and she walked away into the crowd, and she did not look back. And Emily had to press her lips together so hard she tasted blood to keep from calling out the only real friend's name she had left in the world. The toasts began. One after another, the great men rose to honor Michael Carter and his 3 years of marriage. They spoke of loyalty. They spoke of strength. They spoke of family, that terrible word these men loved so much, the word they used to mean the exact opposite of what it should mean. Michael stood at the head of the great table, glowing one arm around Emily's waist, and he accepted their words like a king accepting tribute. And then old Salvatore rose heavy and slow and lifted his glass, and the whole enormous room went quiet and turned to look at him, every eye, every face, every guard. This was it. Emily felt Michael's arm loosen around her as he turned toward the old man. She felt the attention of the entire house swing away from her like a searchlight sweeping past. And very gently, very casually, the way a woman does when she needs to slip out to fix her makeup, she stepped back out of her husband's arm. He did not notice. He was watching Salvatore. Everyone was watching Salvatore. She took one step back, then another. She kept her face pleasant, her movements unhurried. A queen does not run. A queen simply is somewhere, and then gracefully is somewhere else. She reached the edge of the crowd. Salvatore was booming out some story about the old days, and the room was laughing, and no one was looking at her at all now. She turned and she walked at a normal pace toward the hall that led toward the powder rooms, and only when she was out of sight of the ballroom did she quicken her steps. Down the hall, past the powder rooms, to the small unmarked door at the end that opened onto the service corridor, the ugly narrow world behind the beautiful walls. She pushed through it and closed it softly behind her, and the sudden dimness and the smell of the kitchen and the muffling of the party's roar hit her all at once, and she put her hand against the wall to steady herself. She could still turn back. That thought came clear and cold. Right now, this second, she could still turn back and walk into the ballroom and take her place at Michael's side, and no one would ever know she had wavered on the edge of the rest of her life. It would be safe. It would be easy. It would be a slow, comfortable death that lasted 40 more years. She put her hand on her stomach. "No," she whispered. "No, we're going." And she ran. Down the service corridor, her wine-red gown gathered up in her fists, her expensive shoes silent on the concrete floor. Past the pantry, past the wine cellar, past the staff break room, where a young dishwasher looked up in surprise, and she pressed a finger to her lips and pushed a $100 bill into his hand without stopping. And he took it and looked away, because everyone in that house knew how to look away. She burst into the kitchen, and it was chaos caterers everywhere. Steam and shouting and the clatter of plates, and no one even glanced at her, because in that madness, a woman in a beautiful dress, moving fast, was just one more thing to get out of the way of. The delivery door stood propped open at the far end, and cold night air was pouring through it. And beyond it, she could see the dark shapes of the trash bins and the loading area, and past them, freedom. She reached the third linen cart. She dropped to her nanning and reached underneath, and her hand closed on the strap of a duffel bag, and she pulled it out, and it was heavy, and she unzipped it just enough to see the bag of dinner rolls tucked inside, and she almost laughed and almost sobbed at the same time, because Rosa had done it. Rosa had done exactly what she promised, right down to the bread. She slung the bag over her shoulder. She stood. She turned toward the open door. And in the doorway, backlit by the security lights of the loading area, a man was standing. Emily froze. He was one of Michael's, she could tell that instantly, the black suit, the earpiece, the way he held himself. He was looking right at her, and she stood there in the middle of the kitchen with a duffel bag full of cash over her shoulder and fake papers strapped to her thigh and her whole future hanging on the next 3 seconds, and she waited for him to raise his hand to his ear and speak the words that would end everything. Mrs. Carter is at the delivery door. But he did not speak. He just looked at her. And then slowly this stranger, this armed man, whose entire job was to keep her inside these walls, took one step to the side. He moved out of the doorway. He cleared the path. And in a voice so low she almost did not hear it over the noise of the kitchen, he said, "My mother got out when I was 7. If she hadn't, my father would have killed us both." He looked away out at the dark. "Go fast, ma'am, and don't ever come back." Emily did not stop to ask. She did not stop to thank him. There was no time and there were no words. She just ran past him out the door into the cold, and the night swallowed her up. She ran across the loading area, past the bins, and she scrambled over the low stone wall in her wine-red gown, tearing it. Not caring, and she dropped down onto the grass on the other side, and she kept running down the dark slope toward the road, toward the little economy car that Rosa's cousin's boy had left there for her that afternoon. Keys under the wheel well, exactly as promised. Behind her, the great house blazed with light, and the party roared on, and inside it, 100 killers laughed and drank and toasted a marriage. And her husband stood at the head of the table with his arm around empty air, still not knowing, still smiling, still believing he was the most powerful man in the world. Emily reached the car. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the keys twice before she got the door open. She threw the duffel bag onto the passenger seat and climbed in and started the engine. And the little car coughed and caught, and she pulled out onto the dark road with her headlights off, gliding past the front gates where more of Michael's men stood guard. And none of them so much as turned their heads because they were watching for cars coming in. Not for one small, forgettable car slipping quietly out. She did not turn her headlights on until she was a full mile away. And then she did, and the road unrolled in front of her, black and empty and full of every possible future. And she pressed her foot down on the mud and she drove. She drove west, away from the water, away from the estate, away from the only life she had known for 3 years. Her hands stopped shaking somewhere around the state line. Her breathing slowed. And it was only when she was truly gone that the reality of it hit her, and she began to laugh, and then the laughing turned into crying. And she cried so hard she had to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway and rest her forehead against the steering wheel until it passed. She pressed her hand to her stomach. "We did it," she whispered. "We got out. I told you I'd get you out, and I did. We're free, baby. We're free." And she believed it. God help her in that moment, on the side of the dark highway, with $40,000 in a bag of dinner rolls beside her and a new name strapped to her thigh. Emily Carter truly believed that she was free. She did not know that back at the estate, the party was still going, and Michael was still smiling, and her wedding dress was still hanging in the closet where she had left it. And it would be hours yet before anyone thought to wonder where the queen had gone. And she did not know what he would find when they finally went looking. She did not know that in her rush she had left one small thing behind. One tiny thing she had never meant to leave hidden at the bottom of a bathroom trash can on the 3rd floor. She had erased every trace of herself, every trace but one. And that one small thing, that little plastic stick with its 2 pink lines, was going to bring the full weight of the American underworld down on her like the wrath of God. Because Michael Carter was not going to find a note from a wife who left him. Michael Carter was going to find out he was going to be a father, and that the mother of his child had run into the night to keep his baby away from him, and there was no force on this earth, no ocean wide enough, no name false enough, no distance great enough to protect a woman from a man like that once he knew. But that was hours away. For now, Emily drove west into the dark, one hand on the wheel and one hand on her belly, free and terrified and alive, more alive than she had been in 3 years, singing softly to a child who could not yet hear her, chasing the first thin gray light of a morning she had never truly believed she would live to see. The party ended at 2 a.m, and Michael Carter went looking for his wife with a smile still on his face. He had spent the last hour of the night accepting the goodbyes of powerful men, and every one of them had said the same thing, that his queen was the most beautiful woman in the room, that he was a lucky man, that a marriage like his was a rare and blessed thing in a world as ugly as theirs. And Michael had believed every word because he had built his whole life on the certainty that Emily was his, the one clean thing, the one loyal thing, the one thing in all the world he never had to guard. So when he climbed the grand staircase that night, loosening his tie, he was not worried. He was warm. He was thinking about how he would find her already in bed half asleep, and how she would murmur his name, and how he would tell her that it was the best night of his life, and that in 3 years she had turned him into a man he almost respected. He opened the bedroom door, and the room was empty. "Emily," he called. Nothing. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He checked the sitting room, the balcony, the closet. Empty, empty, empty. And still, even then, he was not afraid because fear was not a thing that lived easily in Michael Carter. He simply assumed she had gone down to say goodnight to someone, or gone to the kitchen for water, or fallen asleep in one of the guest rooms the way she sometimes did when the parties ran late. He went back down. He found his head of security, a hard, quiet man named Dominic, who had been with him for 15 years, and he said easily, "Where's my wife?" And something in Dominic's face made the warmth in Michael's chest go cold. "I haven't seen her, boss," Dominic said. "Not since the toasts." "Not since the toasts," Michael repeated. He looked at his watch. It was nearly 2:30. The toast had ended before 11. "That's 3.5 hours ago." "Yes, boss." For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. And then Michael said in a voice that had gone very calm, the calm that everyone in that house had learned to fear, "Find her." The house came awake again, but not the way it had been awake for the party. This was a different kind of awake. Men who had been drinking an hour ago were suddenly cold sober, moving through the halls, opening doors, searching. And Michael stood in the great hall in the center of it all, and he waited, and with every minute that passed without someone bringing her to him, the cold in his chest spread further until his whole body felt like it was carved out of ice. It was Dominic who found the first thing. He came down the stairs, fast, too fast, and Michael saw his face and knew before he spoke. "Boss," Dominic said, "you need to come up, to the bedroom." Michael went up those stairs like a man walking to his own execution. On the floor of the bedroom, laid out almost carefully, was Emily's wedding dress. The one she had worn 3 years ago. She had kept it all this time wrapped in tissue in the back of the closet, and now it lay spread across the floor, and on top of it, placed neatly side by side, were her wedding rings. The engagement ring he had chosen, the band he had slid onto her finger in front of God and 200 witnesses, and the diamonds. His diamonds, the ones he had fastened around her throat that very evening, the ones he had told her he would burn the world to protect, coiled on the white fabric like a dead snake. And on top of it all, a single folded piece of paper. Michael crossed the room slowly. He knelt. He picked up the paper with a hand that did not shake because Michael Carter's hands never shook, and he unfolded it, and he read 6 words written in his wife's handwriting. "I cannot survive your world. Let me go." He read it once, then he read it again. Then he stood very slowly, and he folded the paper back up, and he put it in his breast pocket over his heart. And when he turned around, his face was so empty that Dominic, who had watched this man do unspeakable things without flinching, took an involuntary step back. "Boss," Dominic said carefully, "we'll find her. She can't have gotten far. She doesn't know anyone she doesn't have." "Search the house," Michael said quietly. "Every room, every closet, every trash can. I want to know everything she touched today. Everything. Do you understand me? I want to know what she ate. I want to know what she threw away. I want every second of her day accounted for." "Yes, boss." "And Dominic." Michael's voice did not rise at all, and that was the terrifying part. "No one leaves this house until I know how she got out of it. Not one guest, not one guard, not one cook, no one." The lockdown was total. The great gates were sealed. Men were posted at every door. And the guests, those powerful and dangerous men who had come to honor Michael Carter's marriage, found themselves politely, unmistakably imprisoned inside his home, while his men tore it apart looking for the woman who had walked out of it. Some of them were insulted. Some of them were frightened. All of them stayed because you did not argue with Michael Carter on the night his world fell apart. It took 20 minutes for a search to reach the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor was where the unused guest rooms were, the ones no one ever slept in, and at the end of the hall was the small guest bathroom that no one ever used. A young soldier named Tommy, not much more than a boy, was assigned to search it, and he did it lazily at first because who would hide anything in a bathroom nobody used? And then he pulled out the small wicker trash can under the sink, and he looked inside and he went very still. He carried it downstairs, holding it out in front of him like it might explode. "Boss," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Boss, I found something in the bathroom, the one on the third floor." Michael turned, and Tommy, with a shaking hand, reached into the trash can and lifted out a small plastic stick and held it up so that Michael could see the little window on the side of it and the two pink lines. For a long moment, Michael Carter did not move at all. The entire hall had gone silent. Every man in it understood what he was looking at, and every man in it understood in the same instant that whatever came next was going to be the most dangerous thing any of them had ever lived through. Michael crossed the room. He took the plastic stick out of the boy's hand gently, the way you would take something fragile from a child. He turned it over. He looked at the two lines, and his face, which had been empty, began very slowly to change. It was not rage that came into it first. It was something worse. It was understanding. "She's pregnant," Michael said softly to no one. "She's carrying my child." He looked up, and his eyes moved slowly around the room from face to face, and not one man could meet them. "She didn't leave me," he said, and his voice was almost wondering, almost soft, and it was the most frightening sound any of them had ever heard. "She didn't run because she stopped loving me. She ran because she's pregnant. She ran to take my child away from me. She looked at my life, and she looked at my son, and she decided my son would be better off if he never knew my name." He closed his hand around the pregnancy test. "Boss," Dominic began. "Everyone out of this room," Michael said. "Except you, Dominic. Everyone else out. Now." The room emptied in seconds. And when it was just the two of them, Michael Carter, who had not wept once in 30 years, who had buried his own mother without shedding a tear, stood in the center of his great empty hall with a pregnancy test crushed in his fist, and made a sound that Dominic would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. It was not a sob. It was lower than that and worse than that. It was the sound of something enormous cracking apart under its own weight. And then just as suddenly it stopped. Michael straightened. He wiped his face once with the back of his hand. And when he spoke again, his voice was perfectly steady and perfectly calm and perfectly dead. "I want her found," he said. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care who I have to bury. I don't care if I have to turn every state in this country upside down and shake it until she falls out. She is carrying my child, Dominic, and she is out there alone in the dark, pregnant, and afraid, thinking she's protecting my baby from me." His voice did not rise. "I am going to find her, and I am going to show her that she was wrong about me, and she is going to come home." Dominic had known this man for 15 years, and he chose his next words very carefully because he knew they might be his last. "Boss," he said, "how did she get out? That's what we need to understand first. She didn't do this alone. Someone helped her, someone in this house." And Michael went very still again, and something new came into his face, something even colder. "Yes," he said, "someone helped her." He turned toward the kitchen. "Bring me the staff, all of them. I want to look at every face that works in this house. Because whoever helped my wife take my child away from me is going to tell me exactly where she went. And then they are going to wish they had never been born." The interrogations began at 3 a.m, and they were the worst hours of that terrible night. One by one, the staff of the Carter estate were brought before Michael in his study, and one by one he studied their faces and asked them soft questions, and watched their hands and their eyes, and the sweat on their upper lips. The caterers knew nothing, and he let them go. The florist knew nothing. The extra security hired for the night knew nothing. He worked through them methodically, patiently, a hunter reading tracks, and with each one who knew nothing, his certainty grew that the one who did know was still out there somewhere in the line of frightened faces. And then they brought in Rosa. She came into the study with her chin up and her hands folded in front of her apron, a big soft woman with flowers still in the creases of her knuckles, and she looked Michael Carter in the eye, which almost no one dared to do, and she said, "You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter." Michael studied her for a long time. "How long have you worked in this house, Rosa?" he asked. 6 years, sir." 6 years. He nodded slowly. "You've been close to my wife. She likes you. She talks to you." "She's a lonely young woman, sir," Rosa said evenly. "In a house full of men. She talks to the only other woman who's here every day. There's nothing strange in that. No, Michael agreed. There's nothing strange in that. He leaned forward. So tell me, Rosa, in 6 years of talking to my lonely wife, did she ever tell you she wanted to leave? And Rosa held his gaze, and she did not blink, and she said, no, sir, never once. If she had, I'd have told her she was a foolish girl. A woman married to a man who loves her the way you love her doesn't leave. She'd have to be out of her mind. It was a good answer. It was almost a perfect answer, and for a moment Michael almost believed it, because it was exactly the kind of thing a loyal servant would say. But Michael Carter had spent 30 years learning to read the tiny things people did not know they were showing, and there was something in the steadiness of Rosa's gaze that was too steady, something in the calm of her hands that was too calm, as if she had prepared for this, as if she had known this moment was coming and had practiced her face for it in a mirror. Sit down, Rosa, he said. I'd rather stand, sir. Sit down. She sat. Michael got up from behind his desk and came around and sat on the edge of it right in front of her close. And he pulled the folded note from his breast pocket and opened it and held it up in front of her face. My wife left me this, he said. 6 words. I cannot survive your world. Let me go. He watched her eyes as she read it. And she left me something else, something she didn't mean to leave. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test and held it up next to the note. She's carrying my child, Rosa. Did you know that? Did my lonely wife tell her only friend that she was pregnant? And Rosa was good. She was very good. She let her eyes widen and her hand flew to her mouth and she said, Pregnant, oh sweet Lord. No, no, sir. She never said a word to me, but she was a fraction of a second too slow. Michael had watched 1,000 people learn shocking news, and the shock on Rosa's face came a half-beat late, the way an actor does, and in that half-beat, he saw everything. You knew, he said softly. Sir, I swear to you. You knew she was pregnant. You knew she was leaving. You helped her. He was not shouting. He never shouted. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. Rosa, look at me. I am going to be a father. My child is out there in the cold, in the dark, with a frightened girl who thinks she's saving him from me. Every hour that passes, they're in more danger. Not from me, from the world, from my enemies. Who would pay a fortune to get their hands on the pregnant wife of Michael Carter? Do you understand what you've done? You didn't save her. You put a target on her back and on my child's. Rosa's chin trembled just slightly, and a single tear escaped her eye and ran down into the soft creases of her cheek. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. And Michael sat back and he looked at her with something that was almost tenderness and almost admiration and entirely without mercy. You love her, he said, don't you? That's what this is. You actually love her. He shook his head slowly. That's a beautiful thing, Rosa. It really is. Loyalty like that. I built my whole empire looking for men who'd be as loyal to me as you've been to a girl who isn't even your own blood. He stood up. But here's the thing about your loyalty. It's pointed at the wrong person. Because I love her more than you ever could, and I am going to find her whether you help me or not. The only question is how long it takes and how much danger she's in during every hour it takes. You could shorten that. You could make her safer right now by telling me where she went. Or you could keep her out there in the dark a little longer and pray my enemies don't find her before I do. He looked down at her. So think very carefully, Rosa. Whose side keeps that girl and that baby safe, mine, or the silence you're holding on to? It was a masterful thing to say, and it was cruel precisely because it was half true, and Rosa felt it land, felt the doubt it was designed to plant, felt the terrible logic of it worming into her heart. Because what if he was right? What if Emily was out there alone and there really were worse men than Michael, and her silence really was leaving that girl in danger? But then she thought of Emily's face. She thought of the way that girl flinched at gunshots. She thought of the collar of diamonds around her throat. She thought of a child raised in this house learning to hold a gun before it learned to read. And Rosa's spine went straight. I don't know where she is, she said. And this time her voice was rock solid because this time she was telling a lie she was willing to die for. And if I did Mr. Carter God as my witness, I would carry it to my grave. Because that girl was drowning in this house, and you were too busy admiring her to notice she couldn't breathe. The study went absolutely silent. Michael looked at her for a long, long moment, And then to the astonishment of Dominic standing by the door, something almost like respect passed across his face. There it is, Michael said quietly. There's the truth. Finally. He nodded slowly. You did help her. And you're not going to tell me where she went no matter what I do to you, are you? No, sir, Rosa said. I'm not. And Michael straightened his jacket and he walked back around his desk and he sat down. And for a moment, Rosa was certain she was about to die. And she found to her own surprise that she was not afraid. But Michael did not reach for a gun. Instead, he steepled his fingers and looked at her and he said, I'm not going to hurt you, Rosa. Dominic's head came up in surprise. I'm not, Michael said again. You know why. Because you're the only person in this entire house who actually loved my wife for herself and not for what she meant to me. And she's going to need people like you before this is over. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay right here in this house. You're going to be watched every minute of every day. Your phone is mine. Your mail is mine. Every person you talk to is mine because sooner or later, Rosa, that girl is going to get scared and lonely, and she's going to want to reach out to the one friend she had. And when she does, I'll be listening. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Rosa had ever seen. You didn't hide her from me. You just delayed me. Now get out of my sight. And that was the moment Rosa understood the full horror of the man she had crossed. He did not need to torture her. He simply turned her in an instant from Emily's savior into Emily's greatest danger, a baited trap that the girl would walk into out of nothing but loneliness and love. Rosa walked out of that study on legs that barely held her, and the first thing she did, the very first thing, was pray that Emily was smart enough and strong enough to never, ever try to call her. It was nearly dawn when they found the second thread to pull, and it was not from any of the staff. It was from the cameras. Michael's men had spent hours going through the security footage, and most of it was useless because Emily had known where the cameras were, had spent 3 years unconsciously mapping them, and had moved through the blind spots like a ghost. They lost her in the service corridor. They lost her in the kitchen. But there was one camera mounted high on the corner of the delivery bay that no one had thought about, because it pointed out at the loading area and not into the house. And on that camera, for exactly 4 seconds, a figure in a torn wine-red gown climbed over the low stone wall at the back of the property and dropped down onto the other side and ran off into the dark. 4 seconds. But it was enough because now they knew which way she had gone. And there was more, because that same camera 10 minutes earlier had caught something else. A young security guard, one of Michael's own men, a soldier named Kevin, standing in the delivery doorway. And it had caught the moment when Emily appeared behind him in the kitchen. And it had caught the moment when Kevin turned and saw her and looked at her for 3 long seconds. And then it had caught the moment when Kevin stepped aside. Michael watched that footage 4 times. Bring me Kevin, so he said. They found Kevin trying to leave through the front gate, which had, of course, been sealed for hours. And the fact that he was trying to leave told Michael everything he needed to know before the young man was even brought into the study. Kevin was 23 years old. He had been with the organization for 2 years. He was pale and sweating, and his hands would not stay still. And when he was pushed down into the chair in front of Michael's desk, he started talking before anyone had asked him anything. Boss, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. I swear to God. You let my wife walk out of my house, Michael said. Boss, I watched you do it on the camera. She came into the kitchen with the bow, and you saw her, and you stepped aside, and you let her go. Michael's voice was terribly gentle. Why, Kevin? What did she say to you? What did she pay you? And Kevin, who was 23 and terrified, and in far, far over his head, made the mistake of trying to lie. She didn't pay me anything, boss. I didn't even see her. That camera must be... Michael held up one hand and Kevin stopped talking. Kevin, Michael said, look at me. I am going to ask you one more time, and I want you to understand something before you answer. My wife is out there in the world carrying my child, and every minute I spend in this room with you is a minute I'm not spending finding her. So my patience, which is not large to begin with, is very nearly gone. Now, what did she say to you? And the boy broke. He put his face in his hands and he started to cry. And through his fingers, he said, she didn't say anything, boss, I swear. I looked at her and I saw her face and she looked like my mother used to look. And I thought about how my mom got out when I was a kid and I stepped aside. That's all. She ran past me and she went over the wall and she got in a little car that was waiting on the road and she drove off. That's everything. That's all I know. Please, boss, please. Michael sat very still. A car was waiting, he said. On the road. Someone left her a car. Yes, boss. What kind of car? What color did you see the plate? It was small, boss, silver or gray. It was dark. I couldn't see the plate. I swear I couldn't. Which way did it go? West, boss, away from the water, toward the highway. Michael nodded slowly, and then he looked at this young man, this boy who had done the single kindest thing anyone had done in that house all night, who had let a frightened pregnant girl escape into freedom because she reminded him of his mother and Michael Carter, who understood better than anyone alive the price of disloyalty, made his decision. Get up, he said. Kevin got up shaking. You let my wife go, Michael said. In my own house. Do you understand what that costs? Do you understand what every man in this organization would expect me to do to you right now? To make an example so that no one ever does it again? Yes, boss, Kevin whispered. I understand. And Michael looked at him for a long moment, and then he said something that no one in that room expected. She reminded you of your mother, he said, and you couldn't do it. You had one job, and a frightened woman looked at you the right way, and your heart got in the way of your orders. He almost smiled. You know what, Kevin, 20 years ago, and I'd have understood that. Before all this. Before I became what I am. He turned away. Get him out of my sight. Send him home to his mother. He's finished here, but he walks out breathing. Once. This is the only time in my life I'll ever do this. And I'm only doing it because that girl he let go is carrying my son, and maybe the fact that a good man's heart couldn't hurt her means she's a little safer out there than I feared. And they took Kevin away alive, and it was the strangest mercy anyone in that organization had ever seen, and it told them all something they had never understood about their boss before that night, which was that underneath 30 years of ice there was still somewhere a heart, and it had just been broken. By dawn, Michael Carter had assembled what he knew. His wife was pregnant. She had planned this for weeks, maybe months. She had money, she had help from inside, she had a car waiting, and she had almost certainly bought false papers, which meant she was traveling under a name he did not know. She had gone west toward the highway in a small silver or gray car, and she had a head start of nearly 8 hours. She could be in New Jersey. She could be in Pennsylvania. She could be halfway to Ohio. It was not much. For most men, it would have been nothing. But Michael Carter was not most men. He was one of the most powerful criminals on the entire Eastern Seaboard, and he had spent 30 years building a web of influence, of debts, of favors, of frightened men in useful places. And now, for the first time in his life, he was going to pull every single strand of that web at once for one purpose, to find one woman. He called in his people at first light, and he stood before them unshaven, his tie gone, his eyes red, but his voice dead calm, and he told them what was going to happen. There is a woman out there, he said, my wife. She is pregnant with my child. She is traveling under a false name in a small silver car somewhere west of here, and I am going to find her. He looked around the room. Here is what we are going to do. Every hotel, every motel, every rooming house between here and Ohio is going to get a phone call. Every man we know at the phone companies, the banks, the credit agencies is going to start watching for a new name, buying a bus ticket, renting a room, seeing a doctor. Because she's pregnant, and pregnant women need doctors. Every clinic, every pharmacy, every OB office within a day's drive is going to have someone watching it, and I am putting out a bounty. He paused. $5 million to anyone who gives me a location that leads to my wife, not a rumor. A location. $5 million cash, no questions. The room went silent. $5 million was a fortune that would make every desperate man in 3 states start hunting. And there's one more thing, Michael said. The news. Dominic frowned. Boss, the news, that draws a lot of attention. Attention we don't usually... I know what it draws, Michael said, but it also puts her face in front of 10 million people. So this is what we do. We don't say she ran from her husband. We say she's missing. A frightened, pregnant young woman missing from her home, possibly not in her right mind, and her devastated husband is offering a reward for information. We make her a victim. We make the whole country want to help me find her. He almost smiled. And the beautiful part, Dominic, is that every person who sees that broadcast and feels sorry for the poor missing pregnant girl becomes another set of eyes hunting her for me. She won't be able to walk into a gas station without someone recognizing her face from the television. The whole country will help me put her back in her cage, and they'll think they're doing something kind. Dominic stared at his boss, and not for the first time that night, he felt something cold move through him, because it was a genuinely brilliant plan, and it was also one of the cruelest things he had ever heard. "It's monstrous, boss," he said quietly, and he was the only man alive who could have said it. You know that, making the whole country hunt a scared girl and think they're saving her. And Michael turned and looked at him, and for just a moment the mask slipped, and Dominic saw underneath it not a monster, but a terrified man. A man who had just discovered he was going to be a father and had that fatherhood ripped away. In the same instant, a man who did not have the tools to love the way normal men loved, and was trying to use the only tools he had ever been given, which were power and money and fear. "You think I don't know that," Michael said very low. "You think I don't know that the very thing I'm doing to find her is the thing that made her run. She left because my whole world is a cage, and to get her back, I'm building the biggest cage of all out of the entire country." He looked away. "But what am I supposed to do, Dominic? Let my child be raised by strangers under a false name, never knowing who his father is? Let him grow up thinking his father is the kind of man a woman has to flee in the night to protect him from?" His voice cracked just once. "I'm getting to find her, and I'm going to make her understand that she was wrong. That's all I want. I just want the chance to prove to her that she was wrong about me. Is that so much to ask?" And Dominic, who had known this man for 15 years, looked at him and thought, "But she wasn't wrong, boss. That's the terrible thing. She wasn't wrong at all." But he did not say it. He simply nodded, and he went to make the phone calls, and by 9 o'clock that morning, the machine had started to move. 200 miles away in a cheap motel room in the flat gray middle of Pennsylvania, Emily Carter, who was now Sarah Miller, woke up on top of the covers still wearing the torn wine-red gown because she had been too exhausted to do anything but fall onto the bed when she finally stopped driving at 4 in the morning. For one perfect, blissful moment, she did not remember where she was. And then she did all of it: the party, the toasts, the service corridor, the guard in the doorway, the wall, the comb, the long dark highway, and she sat up fast, her heart pounding, and she looked around the small, ugly room, and she started unexpectedly to laugh. Because she had done it. She had actually truly done it. She was free. She got up, and she peeled off the ruined gown, and she stood under the weak stream of the motel shower for a long time, and she let herself cry. And this time it was not fear. It was something else, something she had not felt in 3 years, which was relief. So total it felt like being born. Then she dried off and she opened the duffel bag and she pulled out the plain clothes Rosa had packed for her jeans and a soft sweater and sneakers. Ordinary clothes. Invisible clothes. The clothes of Sarah Miller, who was nobody at all, and she put them on and she looked at herself in the cloudy mirror. "Hello, Sarah," she whispered, and she pressed her hand to her stomach. "We made it, baby. We're really, truly free." She was hungrier than she had ever been, and she remembered that Rosa had once told her that in the first months, you have to eat for the little one, whether you feel like it or not. So she counted out a small amount of cash, tucking the rest deep in the bag, and she walked out into the cold gray morning to find something to eat, and it was the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing she had done in 3 years. Walking down a plain street in a plain town where nobody knew her name. Nobody was watching her. Nobody was armed. There was a small pharmacy on the corner with a lunch counter in the back, the old kind. And she went in and she sat down and she ordered eggs and toast and a glass of milk from a bored teenage waitress who did not look at her twice, and Emily could have wept from the joy of being nobody. She ate slowly. She let herself imagine the future for the first time. A small apartment somewhere. A crib. A window with light coming through it. A school with a slide out front, exactly like Rosa had said. A whole ordinary life laid out in front of her like a road. And then the waitress drying glasses behind the counter reached up without thinking and turned up the volume on the little television bolted to the wall in the corner because a story was coming on, and the woman on the television said the words that turned Emily Carter's blood to ice. By an urgent appeal this morning in the case of a missing woman from Long Island. 26-year-old Emily Carter was last seen at her home late Saturday night. Her family says she is pregnant and may be confused or in distress. Her husband is offering a substantial reward for any information. And then her own face filled the screen. A photograph Michael must have chosen, a beautiful one. Her hair done, her eyes soft. her own face looking down at her from the television in the corner of a pharmacy lunch counter 200 miles from home. Anyone with information is urged to come forward. The reward being offered is $5 million. Emily sat absolutely frozen, a forkful of eggs halfway to her mouth, and her whole body went cold and the room seemed to tilt, and the only thought in her head over and over was, don't move, don't move. If you move, she'll see you. If you look scared, she'll know. Behind the counter, the waitress glanced up at the television, and then casually she glanced over at Emily, and their eyes met. And Emily watched the girl's face, and she saw the exact moment the thought began to form, the little flicker, the tiny frown, the way the eyes went from the woman at the counter to the woman on the screen and back again. She saw the girl start to put it together. $5 million. $5 million. The same face. Emily set down her fork with a hand that she willed not to shake. She made herself smile. She reached into her pocket and she put a $20 bill on the counter, far more than the meal cost, and she said in a voice that came out miraculously steady, "Keep the change, hon. I've got to run. I'm late meeting my sister." And she stood up slow and easy, and she gathered her bag, and she walked toward the door. And every step of that walk was the longest of her life because behind her she could feel the girl's eyes on her back. And she did not know if in the next second she would hear the words, "Wait, hey, wait a minute," or the sound of the girl reaching for a phone. She pushed open the door. The cold air hit her face, and behind her she heard the waitress say something. Just one word, uncertain, quiet. Miss Emily did not turn around. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and she started to walk fast. Not running, never running, and her heart was slamming so hard she thought she might faint. And she turned the corner, and then she did run for the motel, run for the car, because she understood now with total and final clarity that she was not free at all. She had not escaped Michael Carter. No one escaped Michael Carter. She had simply started a race and the whole country was now running in it, and every single person she passed on the street, every waitress and clerk and stranger, every set of eyes in America had just been turned into a hunter. And the prize on her head was $5 million. And she was alone and pregnant and 200 miles from the only friend she had. And her own beautiful face was on every television in the nation. She reached the motel and she threw her things into the bag, and she was in the car and pulling out onto the road within 4 minutes. And as she drove, she looked in the rearview mirror at the little town disappearing behind her, and she understood that this was her life now. This was what she had traded her cage for. Not freedom, a hunt with no end across a whole country with a man behind her who would, as he had told her himself, burn every city in America to the ground before he let her go. And somewhere in that same gray morning, in a black car speeding west out of Long Island, Michael Carter sat with his wife's wedding rings in his pocket and her pregnancy test wrapped in a handkerchief over his heart, and he watched the highway unroll in front of him, and he said quietly to no one, to the child he had not known existed until 8 hours ago, "I'm coming wherever you are, whatever it takes, I'm coming." She drove for 3 hours without stopping, and she did not turn on the radio, and she did not look at another human face. And by the time the sun was high, she understood that she could not keep doing this. She was shaking. Her hands ached from gripping the wheel. And somewhere in the last hour, a new and terrible feeling had begun, a low cramping pain deep in her belly that frightened her more than any camera or bounty ever could. She pulled off the highway into a rest area, and she sat in the car with both hands pressed against her stomach, and she talked to the baby the way she had started to do quietly, the only voice she had left in the world. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay, we're okay. Mama's just scared, that's all. Scared people's bodies do funny things. We're fine. We're going to be fine." But she did not know if that was true. She was 3 months pregnant, alone, running terrified, barely eating, and she knew enough to know that stress could hurt a baby, could even take a baby away. And the cruelest irony in the world was standing in front of her, now plain as day. She had run to protect this child, and the running itself might be the thing that killed it. She remembered then the address she had burned, Rosa's Church, a little town in Pennsylvania. Sister Agnes, who helped women who were running. She did not need the paper anymore. She had memorized it the way Rosa told her to, and she closed her eyes and she saw it again, the name of the town, the name of the street, and she realized she was not far. Maybe an hour, maybe less. It was the only plan she had left. So she started the car and she drove, and every mile she prayed not to God, exactly because she was not sure God visited towns this small, but to something, to anything. Please let there be a woman named Agnes. Please let her be real. Please let there be one safe place left in this country for me. The town, when she reached it a little after 1 in the afternoon, was so small, it was almost nothing. A main street with a hardware store and a diner and a bank, a gas station, and at the end of the street, an old stone church with a white steeple, and beside it a low brick building that was the rectory, and a hand-painted sign that said St. Bridget's. Emily parked around the back, out of sight of the road, the way she was learning to do everything now, and she sat for a moment gathering her courage, and then she walked up to the side door of the rectory and she knocked. For a long moment nothing happened, and her heart began to sink. And then the door opened, and standing there was a small elderly woman in plain clothes with sharp blue eyes and a face that had seen a great deal. And the woman looked at Emily's face, just looked at it, and something in it, the fear, the exhaustion, the hand resting protectively on her belly, told this old woman everything she needed to know. "You better come inside, dear," the woman said. "Quickly now, before someone sees you standing on my doorstep." And Emily stepped inside, and the door closed behind her, and for the first time in 9 hours she was somewhere that was not a car and not being hunted, and her legs simply gave out, and the old woman caught her stronger than she looked and eased her down into a chair. "You're Agnes," Emily said. It was not a question. "Sister Agnes, once upon a time," the old woman said. "Just Agnes now, mostly. And you're a girl who's running from something. I've met 100 of you. Sit still. I'm going to make you some tea, and you're going to drink it, and then you're going to tell me exactly how much trouble you're in, and don't you dare lie to me, because I can't help you if you make it smaller than it is." The tea was strong and sweet, and Emily drank it with both hands wrapped around the cup, and slowly the shaking eased, and slowly the warmth came back into her, and Agnes sat across the little kitchen table and watched her with those sharp blue eyes and waited. "Rosa sent me," Emily finally said, "from Long Island. She said you help women who are running." Something flickered in the old woman's face at the name Rosa. "Rosa," she said softly. "I haven't heard that name in years. How is she?" "She's the best person I've ever known," Emily said, and her eyes filled. "And I'm afraid I've gotten her killed." Agnes was quiet for a moment. "Tell me," she said, and Emily told her. She told her everything, the whole 3 years of it, pouring out the estate, the guns, the man begging on the marble floor, the collar of diamonds, the pregnancy test, the party, the escape. And Agnes listened without interrupting, her face growing graver and graver, and when Emily finally said the name, Michael Carter, the old woman went very still and set down her own cup and closed her eyes for a moment as if she were praying. And when she opened them, the fear in them was plain. "Oh, child," Agnes said quietly. "Oh, you poor child. Of all the men in the world. Do you know who you married?" "I know now," Emily whispered. "No," Agnes said. "No, I don't think you do. Not really. I've helped women running from powerful men. From politicians, from a judge once, from a man who owned half a city. But Michael Carter." She shook her head slowly. "There's powerful, and then there's what he is. That man doesn't have police in his pocket, dear. He has the men the police are afraid of. There is no border you can cross that he can't reach across. There's no name you can buy that he can't unbury given time." She reached across the table and took Emily's cold hand in her warm old one. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you have to understand the size of the thing that's chasing you, or you'll make a small mistake and it'll cost you everything. You cannot afford to be careless. Not once, not ever again. You understand?" And Emily, who had been running on hope, felt that hope go cold in her chest, and she nodded because she did understand finally completely. "I saw myself on the news," she said. "This morning, there's a reward, $5 million. A waitress almost recognized me." Agnes closed her eyes again. "5 million," she breathed. "Then it's worse than I thought. He's not just looking for you. He's turned the whole country into his eyes." She stood up suddenly, brisk, suddenly decades younger in her urgency. "All right, that changes things. You can't stay here more than a night, 2 at the most. This is the first place a smart man looks, eventually the safe houses, the churches, the shelters. But one night you can have. You need sleep, real sleep, and food. And I need to make some calls. There's a network, dear, women like me all over the country. We move people, quietly, off the roads, off the cameras, off the news. But it takes a little time to arrange, And time is the one thing you may not have much of. There's something else, Emily said, and her voice cracked. I've been having pains in my stomach since this morning. I'm 3 months along and I'm scared, Agnes. I'm scared I'm going to lose the baby. I ran to save it and I'm scared the running is going to stop, Agnes said gently. She came around the table and put her old hands on Emily's shoulders. Stop that right now. Fear makes everything worse and it makes those pains worse too. Here's what's going to happen. Tonight you sleep, really sleep in a real bed in a room where no one can find you. Tomorrow morning, if the pains are still there, I know a doctor 2 towns over who owes me his soul and never writes anything down. He'll look at you and tell you the truth. And he'll never say a word to a living being. All right, one thing at a time. Tonight you're safe. That's all you need to know tonight. And Emily, for the first time since she'd climbed over that wall, let herself be taken care of. And the relief of it was so enormous that she began to cry. And the old woman held her and did not tell her to stop this time. 210 miles to the east, at that same hour, Michael Carter was not sleeping, and he was not eating, and he was not stopping. He had set up a command center in a warehouse in New Jersey halfway to nowhere because he could not bear to stay in the estate where every room held the ghost of her. And in that warehouse, the machine he had built was running at full speed. There were men on phones. There were maps on the walls. There were computers tracking the false name they were slowly, painstakingly trying to uncover. And in the middle of it all sat Michael, unshaven, hollow-eyed, drinking cup after cup of coffee, reading every report the moment it came in. By early afternoon, they had their first real break, and it came exactly where Michael had known it would from the news broadcast. Dominic came in fast with a phone in his hand. Boss, we've got a call on the tip line. A waitress, a little town in Pennsylvania, a pharmacy lunch counter. She says a woman came in this morning for breakfast, sat alone, and she's 90% sure it was Emily. Says the woman got spooked when the news came on and left in a hurry. Michael was on his feet before Dominic finished the sentence. Went home. This morning, maybe 8, 9 o'clock. Get me the town. Get me every road out of that town. Get me every gas station, every motel, every camera on every road within 50 miles. Michael was already moving. She's on foot or in that little car, and she's scared now, which means she's not thinking straight, which means she'll make a mistake. Pennsylvania, west. She's still going west. Get the teams moving, now. But even as he gave the orders, something else was moving inside Michael Carter, something he did not show the men in that warehouse, something he barely let himself feel. Because every report that came in, every confirmation that she was out there alone, frightened running, is not a victory to him. It was a knife. She was pregnant with his child, and she was so afraid of him that she was living in cheap motels and running from television screens. And the man who was supposed to protect her was the very thing she was running from. And there was no report, no lead, no piece of good news his men could bring him that would ever change that terrible fact. Dominic saw it because Dominic always saw it. He came and stood by his boss when the others weren't near, and he said quietly, "Boss, can I say something you're not gonna like?" "You always do," Michael said. "When you find her," Dominic said. "And you will, we both know you will." "What then?" "You corner a scared pregnant girl in some motel parking lot with a dozen armed men. What does that do?" "It proves her right, boss. It proves every single thing she believes about you. You'll have her back, but you'll have lost her forever. She'll never look at you again with anything but terror." And Michael turned and looked at him, and for a moment the fury flared, and Dominic braced himself because he had said the one true thing that no one was allowed to say. But then the fury drained away, and what was left underneath it was so raw and so exhausted that Dominic almost wished the fury had stayed. "I know," Michael said. "You think I don't know that I lie awake with it? Every road my men close, I think that's one more wall I'm building around her, and she left because of the walls. But what's my choice, Dominic? Let her go. Let my child be born in a stranger's town, under a stranger's name, and grow up and live a whole life and die an old man, and never once know that his father was alive and looked for him and would have given up everything for him." His voice broke, and he did not try to hide it, not from Dominic. I can't do it. I would rather have her hate me and be near me than love someone else and be lost to me forever. Does that make me a monster? Probably. But I never claimed to be anything else." And Dominic, who had followed this man for 15 years, looked at him and thought, That's the whole tragedy of you, boss. You'd burn the world down to hold something, and you never once learned that the holding is what breaks it. But he did not say that either. He simply nodded and went to move the teams. That night in the little rectory in the little town, Emily slept. She slept for 11 hours, the deepest sleep of her life, dreamless and total, in a narrow bed in a tiny room with a crucifix on the wall and a window that Agnes had painted shut years ago so that no one could ever open it from the outside. And when she woke, gray light was coming through that painted shut window, and for a moment she did not know where she was, and then she remembered, and the first thing she did before anything else was press her hand to her belly and go very still and wait, listening to her own body. The pains were gone. She lay there in the narrow bed and she felt for them, and they were gone, and she started to cry with relief quietly into the pillow. The baby was all right. The rest and the food and the warmth had done what Agnes said they would, and the baby was all right. She found Agnes in the kitchen already, though it was barely dawn, and the old woman looked at her face and read it instantly. "The pain stopped," Agnes said. "How did you?" "Because you're smiling, dear, and you weren't smiling yesterday." Agnes set a plate in front of her, eggs and toast and fruit. "Eat all of it, and while you eat, I'll tell you what I've arranged because we don't have much time and there's a great deal to say." Emily ate and Agnes talked, and what she said gave Emily the first real hope she'd had since she saw her own face on that television. There was a network, Agnes explained, a quiet chain of women, some of them nuns, and some of them former nuns, and some of them just ordinary women who had once been where Emily was now, and had gotten out and spent the rest of their lives helping others do the same. The network moved women across the country the way water moves through cracks in a rock, slow and quiet and impossible to stop. It moved them off the highways on back roads from safe house to safe house, hundreds of miles at a time, until they were somewhere no one would ever think to look. "There's a woman in Ohio," Agnes said, "then one in Indiana, then further. If you can get through the chain, dear, all the way to the end, there's a place in the mountains out west, a real place where a woman can put down roots and have her baby and start a life. And it is so far off the map that not even Michael Carter's money can find it. Women have disappeared into that place and never been found. Good women, living good lives, free." "How long?" Emily asked. "To get all the way there?" "Weeks," Agnes said honestly. "Maybe 2 months. It's slow because slow is safe. Every stop you rest. Every stop you're hidden. And by the time you reach the end, that baby will be halfway grown and you'll have a new life waiting." She reached across and took Emily's hand. "But Emily, you have to be perfect. Every single step, because he is looking and he is closer than you think. And the network only works if you never ever break the rules. And the first rule, the most important rule, the one that has gotten more women caught than any other, is this. You do not contact anyone from your old life. Not once, not ever. No matter how lonely you get, no matter how much you're hurting, you do not call your friend Rosa. You do not call your mother if you have one. You do not send a letter to a single soul who knew you before. Because that, dear, is exactly what a man like Michael Carter is waiting for. He's not just chasing you. He's watching everyone you love and praying you'll reach out, because the moment you do, he has you. Do you understand? Do you swear it to me?" And Emily thought of Rosa, of her warm arms, and her flower-dusted hands, of the woman who had risked her life to save her. And she thought of how badly, how desperately she wanted to call her and tell her she was safe and let her know it had all been worth it and hear that warm voice one more time. And she understood with a cold clarity that this was the trap. This was the exact thing that would destroy them both. "I swear it," she said. "I'll never contact her. I'll never contact anyone. I swear it on my baby's life." Agnes nodded, satisfied. "Then eat your breakfast and pack your things, because a woman named Ruth is going to come for you at noon, and she's going to drive you the first 200 miles, and your journey out of that man's world begins today." But 200 miles to the east at that very moment, the machine was closing in. Michael's men had spent the night doing exactly what he ordered, pulling apart every road out of that little pharmacy town, and by dawn they had found the second thread. A gas station camera on a county road 12 miles west of the pharmacy had captured a small silver card at 9:40 in the morning the day before, and though the plate was mud-splattered and hard to read, one of Michael's men, a patient man with good eyes, had worked at it for 2 hours and pulled 3 of the 6 characters and cross-referenced them, against every silver economy car reported in the region and narrowed it to a handful and then narrowed it further. And by 9 that morning, Michael Carter knew the make, the model, and 2/3 of the plate of the car his wife was driving. And he knew which direction it had gone, west and slightly north, toward the small towns, toward exactly the kind of place a frightened woman goes to hide. "She's gone to ground somewhere," Michael said, standing at the map, tracing the roads with one finger. "She stopped running, somewhere in here." His finger circled a region of small towns, and by pure chance, by the terrible luck that governs these things, the circle he drew included the little town of St. Bridget's. "Somewhere in here she found a hole to hide in. Get me every property in these towns owned by a church, a charity, a shelter. Every safe house we know about. Every place a runner might be taken in." He straightened. "And send the teams. Quietly. I don't want a war in some little town that brings the state police down on us. I want them to go door to door, town by town, until they find a silver car parked somewhere it shouldn't be. And when they find it, they call me, and no one moves until I get there. No one touches her. No one frightens her. When she's found, I go in alone. Do you understand alone? This ends with me and her and no one else." The teams moved out at 10 o'clock that morning, and the town of St. Bridget's was the fourth on their list. At 11, Emily packed her small bag in the little room with the painted shut window, and she folded the ordinary clothes and she counted her cash. And she felt for the first time something that was almost like peace, because she had a plan, now a real one, a chain of good women stretching all the way to a safe place in the mountains. And all she had to do was follow it and be perfect and never break the rules. At 11:30, Agnes came into the room and her face was wrong. Her sharp blue eyes were frightened. "Emily," she said, "come away from that window. Come now." "What is it? What's wrong?" "A car," Agnes said, moving fast, pulling the curtain closed. "A black car came down Main Street slow, too slow twice now. Men inside. Not from around here. I've seen that kind of slow before, dear, and it's never once been good." She took Emily by the arm. "It might be nothing. It might be nothing at all. But Ruth isn't here yet, and I'm not going to stand here and pray. It's nothing. We're going to move you. There's a cellar under the church and a door out the back of it that lets out into the woods. If those men come to my door, you're going to be in those woods, and I'm going to be an old woman who lives alone and knows nothing about any missing girl." Emily's whole body had gone cold. "The car. Did you see? Could you tell?" "I couldn't tell anything except that it was slow and it was wrong. Now stop asking questions and move." Agnes was already pulling her out of the room down a narrow hall toward a heavy old door. "The car you came in. Where is it?" "Behind the rectory, out of sight of the road you told me to." "Good girl, that's good. That may be the thing that saves you." Agnes pulled open the heavy door, revealing stone steps going down into the dark. "Down there, all the way to the back. There's a wooden door, it sticks. You have to put your shoulder into it. It comes out in the trees behind the churchyard. You wait there in the trees and you do not come out no matter what you hear, no matter what, until I come and get you myself. Do you understand me? Not for any voice but mine." "Agnes, I can't just leave you to—" "You can and you will." The old woman took Emily's face in her hands one last time, the way Rosa had done, and for a moment the two gestures overlapped in Emily's mind and she nearly broke. "Listen to me. I have been doing this for 40 years and I have faced down worse men than whoever is in that car, and I am an old woman with nothing left to lose and God on my side, but you have everything to lose. You have that baby. So you are going to go down those stairs and into those woods, and you are going to protect that child, and you are going to let me do the one thing I am still good for in this world. Now go, go." And she pushed Emily toward the stairs, and Emily went down into the cold dark. Her heart hammering, and behind her she heard the heavy door close, and then a moment later, faint and far away, she heard the sound she had been dreading, the sound of a car pulling to a stop in front of the rectory, and doors opening and men's footsteps on the path. She felt her way through the dark cellar hands out in front of her until she reached the wooden door at the back, and it stuck exactly as Agnes had said. And she put her shoulder into it and shoved once, twice, and it gave, and she stumbled out into cold gray daylight among the trees behind the church, and she pressed herself against the rough bark of an old oak, and she went as still as a hunted animal, and she listened. For a long time there was nothing, and then muffled by distance and by the stone walls of the church, she heard it. A knock on the rectory door, and then faintly a man's voice, polite and cold, and then Agnes's voice, high and quavery, doing something Emily had never heard her do, playing the part of a confused, frightened old woman. Missing girl, no. No, I don't know anything about a missing girl. I live here all alone, officer. I don't get visitors. My eyes aren't what they were. We're not police, ma'am. The man's voice was patient. We're just trying to help a family find someone, a young woman. She might be in some trouble. She'd have come here in a small silver car. A silver car? I haven't seen any silver car. Is she in trouble, the poor thing? What kind of trouble? And Emily, pressed against the oak tree in the cold, listened to that old woman lie for her life and understood that Agnes was buying her time second by second with nothing but her own courage. And Emily's eyes filled and her hands shook and every instinct screamed at her to run back and help. And Agnes's voice came back to her, not for any voice but mine, and she stayed. Would you mind if we took a look around, ma'am? Just to be thorough, set the family's mind at ease. And there was a pause, a terrible pause, and Emily's heart stopped, because if they searched the rectory, they would find the narrow bed still warm, the plate still on the table, the signs of a guest, and the whole thing would come apart. But Agnes, God bless her, Agnes had been doing this for 40 years. Look around at my house, young man. I don't know who you are, and I don't know who sent you, but I am a woman living alone, and you are strange men at my door, and I will not have you walking through my home. If you're truly police, you show me a paper from a judge. And if you're not, then you have no business here at all, and I'll thank you to get off church property before I call the real police and tell them there are men harassing an old woman at the rectory of St. Bridget's. There was a long silence, and Emily in the trees held her breath, and she realized she was praying, actually praying, the words tumbling out of her silently. Please, please, let them leave. Please don't let them hurt her. Please let this old woman's courage be enough. And then finally the man's voice again, and it had gone flat and hard. That won't be necessary, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. You have a good day now. Footsteps on the path, car doors, an engine. But the engine did not drive away. It idled. It sat there running in front of the rectory, and Emily understood with a fresh wave of terror that they had not believed Agnes at all. They were sitting there, watching, waiting to see if anything moved. And then she heard the worst sound of all. She heard one of the car doors open again, and she heard the man's voice lower now, speaking to someone, and though she could not make out the words, she could make out the tone, and the tone was a man making a phone call. Maybe nothing but the old woman's story's got holes in it. She's too calm, and there's a car parked around the back of the place. Silver out of sight of the road. Could be hers, could be the old woman's. I think we should sit on it and call it in. Get word to the boss. Tell him we might have something in a town called St. Bridget's. And in the trees behind the church, Emily Carter pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound, and she felt the whole world close round her like a fist, because they had seen the car, and they were calling Michael, and Michael was going to come, and there was nowhere left to run. And the only thing standing between her and the man she had crossed the state to escape was one brave old woman and a locked rectory door. She looked at the trees around her, at the woods stretching away behind the church, and she made herself think, made herself stop shaking, made herself become, in that moment, something harder than the frightened girl who had climbed over a wall 2 nights ago. She could not go back for the car. The car was watched. The car was finished. But the woods went on, and somewhere past them was a road, and on that road at noon, a woman named Ruth was coming to save her, and it was not yet noon. And so Emily Carter pushed herself off the oak tree, and she turned away from the church and the rectory and the brave old woman she would never be able to thank, and she began to move deeper, into the trees quiet as a deer. One hand on her belly and one hand out in front of her, walking away from everything toward a road she had to pray she could find, while behind her a man sat in a running car and spoke her husband's name into a phone, and 200 miles to the east. In a warehouse full of maps, that phone began to ring. The phone rang in the warehouse at 11:40 in the morning, and Michael Carter answered it on the first ring, and he listened, and the whole room watched his face change. Say that again, he said quietly. The town. Say the name of the town again. St. Bridget's, boss. Little church town. There's an old woman at the rectory, lives alone, and her story's got holes. And there's a silver car parked out back, out of sight of the road, matches what we're looking for. We're sitting on it. What do you want us to do? Michael closed his eyes for a moment, And when he opened them, something in them had gone very still and very bright, the look of a man who has been searching in the dark for 2 days and has finally seen a light. "Nobody moves," he said. "Do you hear me? Nobody goes near that old woman. Nobody goes near that car. You sit there and you watch, and if anyone comes out of that church, you follow them. You do not stop them. You follow them and you call me. I'm coming. I'll be there in 2 hours. When I get there, I go in alone. Nobody touches her but me." He hung up the phone and he stood there in the middle of the warehouse, and for a long moment he did not move at all. And then he said to no one, to himself, in a voice so low that only Dominic heard it, "I found her. My God, I found her." But it did not sound like triumph. It sounded like grief. They were on the road within 4 minutes, Michael and Dominic in the lead car. 3 more cars behind, racing west across New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. And for the first hour, Michael did not say a single word. He sat in the passenger seat with his wife's wedding rings in one hand, turning them over and over in his fingers, and he watched the road blur past, and Dominic, driving, did not dare to break the silence. It was Michael who finally broke it, and what he said surprised even Dominic. "When I was 9 years old," Michael said, still staring out the window, "my father took me down to the docks to watch him do a thing. I didn't know what the thing was. He just said, 'Come with me, son. You're old enough now.' And there was a man tied to a chair, a man who'd stolen from him. And my father put a gun in my hand, and he closed his own hand around mine over the gun, and he pointed it at the man in the chair. And he said, 'This is what it means to be a Carter. This is the only thing that keeps us alive.' And he made me pull the trigger." 9 years old. Michael's voice was flat empty, reciting a fact. "I threw up after, in the water. And my father laughed and he said, 'You'll get used to it.' And he was right. I did." He turned the rings over in his fingers. "That's the world Emily ran from, Dominic. That's the world she's protecting my son from. And the terrible thing, the thing I can't stop thinking about, is that she's right to. Because if I find him, if I raise him one day, he'll be 9 years old, and I'll look at him and some part of me will think it's time. It's time to make him a Carter. And I don't know if I'm strong enough not to. My father wasn't. His father wasn't. What makes me think I'll be any different?" Dominic drove in silence for a moment, and then he said the bravest thing he had ever said to his boss. "Then maybe," he said carefully, "the most loving thing you could do, boss, is let her go." And Michael Carter did not answer him. He just turned the rings over in his fingers and watched the road, and something worked behind his eyes that Dominic could not read, and the cars raced west toward the little town of St. Bridget's. At that same hour, Emily was moving through the trees. She had been walking for nearly half an hour deeper and deeper into the woods behind the church, keeping the gray light of the open fields to her right, so she would not walk in circles, and her legs were shaking, and her breath was ragged, and the cold had gotten into her bones. But she kept going because Ruth was coming at noon, and she had to find the road where Ruth would be. The problem was that she did not know exactly where that road was. Agnes had said Ruth would come to the rectory, but the rectory was watched now, and Emily could not go back to it, which meant Ruth would arrive at a watched house and find men in a black car and drive right past, and Emily would be alone in the woods with no car, no plan, and a killer 2 hours away. She stopped and she leaned against a tree and she pressed both hands to her belly and she made herself think. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, think. Ruth is coming from somewhere. She has to drive into town on a road. If I can get to the edge of the woods, to the road that comes into town from the west, I might be able to see her car and flag her down before she ever reaches the rectory." She looked up at the pale sky, trying to find the sun through the clouds. "West, the road comes in from the west. I keep going this way. I find the road. I wait. And when a car slows down, when a woman is driving, I pray to God it's her." It was a thin plan. It was almost no plan at all, but it was the only one she had, and so she pushed off the tree, and she kept walking, and she prayed, and the woods went on and on. And then she heard it, the sound of running water, a creek somewhere ahead, and beyond the sound of the creek, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a car passing on a road. She had found the edge of the woods. She had found the road. She came out of the trees at the top of a low rise, and below her, maybe 100 yards down a grassy slope, was a 2-lane road, empty, running west into the gray distance. Emily crouched down at the tree line, hidden, watching her heart in her throat, and she waited. A truck passed going the wrong way. A minute later, a farm pickup, an old man driving. Then nothing for a long time, so long that Emily began to despair, began to think she had missed her, that Ruth had already come and gone, that she was truly alone now. And then in the distance, a car appeared. A plain older sedan driving slowly the way a person drives when they are looking for a turn they do not quite know. And Emily strained to see, and as the car drew closer, she could make out the driver, and the driver was a woman gray-haired alone, driving slow looking for something. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. It could be her. It had to be her. But it could also be anyone, any gray-haired woman driving slow. And if Emily ran down that slope and flagged down the wrong car, she would expose herself in the open on a public road, and word travels fast in small towns, and by nightfall it would be all over the county that a woman matching the description on the news had come running out of the woods. She had one chance to guess right, and she had about 10 seconds to decide. The car slowed further as it neared, and the woman inside leaned toward the windshield, peering, searching. And something in the way she was searching, something anxious and purposeful, decided it for Emily. This was a woman looking for someone. This was Ruth. Emily stood up and she ran down the slope, waving both arms over her head, running out into the open toward the road, and the car saw her, and it slowed, and it stopped, and the window came down, and the gray-haired woman looked out at her with sharp, frightened, hopeful eyes. "Are you the one Agnes called about?" the woman said. "Are you the girl? Are you Ruth?" Emily gasped out of breath, terrified she had guessed wrong even now. "I'm Ruth. Get in the back quick, down on the floor. There's a blanket. Get down and stay down until I tell you." The woman's voice was crisp and no nonsense, and Emily could have wept at the sound of it. "There are men in a black car at the rectory. I drove right past it. I knew something was wrong the second I saw it. Get in, girl, get in. We have to move." Emily threw open the back door and climbed in and pulled the blanket over herself and lay down on the floor of the car, curled around her belly, and Ruth put the car in gear and pulled away smooth and unhurried. Just an old woman driving through a small town, nothing to see, nothing at all. "Agnes," Emily said from under the blanket, her voice shaking. The men were at her door. Did you see, is she all right?" "I don't know, girl," Ruth said grimly, her eyes on the road. "I saw the car. I didn't stop. Stopping would have killed us both. Agnes knows the rules better than anyone alive. She'd skin me herself if I'd stopped for her. She can take care of herself. She's been taking care of herself since before you were born. You just stay down and let me get us out of this county, and then we'll worry about the rest." And so Emily stayed down, curled on the floor of a stranger's car under a scratchy blanket, and Ruth drove out of St. Bridget's onto a back road, and then another winding west and south through country so empty that they passed more cows than cars, and mile by mile the fist around Emily's heart began very slowly to loosen. But back in St. Bridget's at 20 minutes past noon, Agnes stood at her window and watched the black car that was still parked in front of her rectory, and she knew with the clear, cold certainty of a woman who had done this for 40 years that Michael Carter himself was coming, and that when he came, there would be no lying her way out of it. So Agnes did the only thing she could think of to do. She made herself a cup of tea and she sat down at her kitchen table and she began very calmly to pray. Not for herself. She was old and she had made her peace with God a long time ago. She prayed for the girl. She prayed that Ruth had gotten to her. She prayed that the chain would hold safe house to safe house all the way to the mountains. And she prayed most of all that when the terrible man arrived, she would have the strength to give him nothing no matter what he did. Michael Carter arrived at St. Bridget's at 10 minutes to 2 in the afternoon. The black cars pulled up in front of the rectory, and Michael got out, and he stood for a moment looking at the little brick building, and then he walked up the path and knocked on the door. And when Agnes opened it, the two of them looked at each other, the killer and the old woman, and each of them understood exactly what the other was. "You're him," Agnes said quietly. "You're the husband." "You know who I am," Michael said. It was not a question. "I know what you are. That's different." Agnes did not step back from the door. She stood in it, small and straight, and she looked up at the man who could have snapped her like a dry branch, and she was not afraid. And Michael saw that she was not afraid, and something in it reminded him of Rosa, of the cook, who had looked him in the eye and told him she would carry the girl's secret to her grave. "She was here," Michael said. "My wife. She was here in this house, wasn't she?" A great many lost women have been in this house, Agnes said. I've lost count of them over the years. I don't remember them all. My memory isn't what it was. There's a silver car behind your church. Is there? I don't drive anymore. My eyes. People leave things on church property all the time. It's not mine to keep track of. Michael looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly he did something that surprised the men behind him. He took his hat off. He stood there on the doorstep of the little rectory, bareheaded, and he spoke to the old woman. Not as a boss speaks to someone in his way, but as a man speaks to someone he needs. I'm going to tell you the truth, he said, because I think you're the kind of woman who's heard every lie there is, and I don't have the energy to try one on you. My wife is pregnant, with my child. I didn't know until she was already gone. She left me a note that said she couldn't survive my world, and she's right, she can't. My world is exactly the poison she thinks it is. I know that. I've always known that. His voice was very quiet. But that's my child she's carrying. And I have spent every hour since she left with a hole in me where I didn't even know there was a place for a hole, and I just want to see her. I want to talk to her. I want to look at her face and know that she's safe and that the baby's safe, and I want to tell her something that I can't tell her through a note or a phone. That's all. I'm not here to drag her back in chains. I swear that to you on the life of the child she's carrying. I just want 5 minutes to say one thing to her face. And Agnes looked at him, and she was old, and she was wise, and she had heard 10,000 men say 10,000 tender things they did not mean, and she almost did not believe him. But there was something in his face, something broken and true underneath all that ice. And it frightened her more than any threat could have, because a lie she could resist forever. But a man telling the truth was a much harder thing to send away. Still, she thought of the girl. She thought of the collar of diamonds. She thought of a 9-year-old boy with a gun in his hand, and she made her choice. She made whatever you want to say to her, Agnes said gently. You should have said it while she was still willing to listen. A woman doesn't climb over a wall in the middle of the night to get away from a man she thinks might change. She climbs the wall because she's finally understood that he won't. She began slowly to close the door. I don't know where your wife is, and if I did, I would die before I told you. Now get off church property, Mr. Carter. There's nothing here for you. There's nothing here for you anywhere in the world. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you might start to become the kind of man a woman wouldn't have to run from. Good day. And she closed the door in Michael Carter's face, and she turned the lock, and she leaned against it, and only then, with the door safely closed, did her old hands begin to shake. On the other side of the door, Michael Carter stood very still. Dominic, watching from a few feet away, braced himself because he had seen what happened to people who spoke to Michael the way that old woman just had. He waited for the order to break down the door, the order to tear the place apart, the order to make the old woman talk. But the order did not come. Michael stood on the doorstep for a long moment, holding his hat in his hands, and then he put it back on, and he turned, and he walked back down the path to the cars, and his face was a thing Dominic had never seen before and would never forget. Boss, Dominic said carefully, the car's still out, B. She was here. The old woman's lying. You want us to? No, Michael said. Boss, if we search the... I said no. Michael stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the path, and he looked back at the little rectory and at the church and at the woods beyond it, gray and endless, into which his wife had vanished. She's not here anymore. The old woman moved her the second we knocked on the door the first time. She's gone. Hours ago, maybe. She's somewhere in those woods or in a car on a back road, and she's terrified, and she's running, and it's my fault. All of it is my fault. He was quiet for a moment. That old woman just told me the truest thing anyone said to me in 20 years. And she said it knowing I could kill her for it. You know how rare that is, Dominic? A person who tells you the truth when the truth might get them killed. He almost laughed. Emily used to be able to do that in the beginning, and I trained her out of it. I taught her to smile and lie, because that's what everyone in my world does. And I never once noticed I was teaching my own wife to be afraid of me, until she was so afraid she ran. Dominic said nothing. There was nothing to say. Get the car, Michael said quietly. The silver one. Have it towed somewhere and cleaned, and hold on to it. She might come back for something in it, though I doubt it. And pull the men off this town. All of them. Pull them off, Dominic stared. Boss, this is the closest we've been. She was here this morning. If we flood the county, check every road we could. Still, I know we could, Michael said. That's exactly the problem. He got into the car and Dominic got in beside him, and Michael looked out the window at the little town, and he said something that Dominic would think about for the rest of his life. Every road I close is one more wall. Every man I put on a corner is one more bar on the cage. I've been so busy trying to catch her that I never once asked myself what I was going to have if I caught her. A wife who hates me, a son who fears me, a woman I love looking at me across a dinner table for the rest of her life with the exact look that old woman had in her eyes just now. He shook his head slowly. I don't want that. God help me, I've wanted a lot of ugly things in my life and gotten most of them, but I don't want that. So pull the men off. Give me some room to think, because I'm starting to believe there's only one way to actually get her back, and it's the one way I've never once tried in my whole life. What's that, boss? Dominic asked. And Michael Carter looked out the window at the gray woods where his wife had disappeared, and he said, deserve her. The cars pulled away from St. Bridget's, and behind them the little town settled back into its gray afternoon quiet. And in the rectory, an old woman finally let herself sit down and weep with relief, and 40 miles to the southwest, on a back road winding through empty farm country. Emily Carter finally sat up from the floor of Ruth's car when the old woman told her it was safe, and she looked out the window at the fields going by, and she did not know, could not have known, that the man hunting her had just for the first time in his life begun to turn around. Ruth drove for 4 hours that afternoon off the highways through 100 nameless towns, and she and Emily talked the whole way, the careful, honest talk of two women who both understood exactly how much danger they were in. You did everything right, Ruth told her watching the road. Agnes said you followed every rule. That's rare, girl. Most of them can't help themselves. They call somebody, their mother, their sister, their best friend from high school. They just can't bear the loneliness of it, and they reach out just once, just to hear a familiar voice, and that's it. That's how they get caught every single time. She glanced in the mirror. But you haven't called anybody, have you? No, Emily said. There's only one person I'd want to call. The woman who saved me. Rosa. And Agnes made me swear I never would, and I understood why. He's watching her, isn't he? Rosa. He knows she helped me, and he's watching her, waiting for me to call. Almost certainly, Ruth said, which means the kindest thing you can do for your friend Rosa is to never ever contact her. As long as you stay away from her, you keep her safe and you keep yourself safe. The day you call her is the day you kill you both. You understand that, dear still? Sai said, I told them. I understand, Emily said, and her heart ached because it meant that Rosa, the one person on earth who had loved her enough to risk everything, was now a person she could never, as long as she lived, speak to again. That was the price. That was the cost of freedom. You had to leave behind everyone who had ever loved you, and you had to do it so completely that even the leaving could not be witnessed. They reached the first safe house that evening, a farmhouse in Ohio run by a widow named Carol, who took Emily in without asking a single question, and fed her and gave her a room, and Ruth stayed the night and left in the morning, and the chain had held. Emily was one link further down the line, one link further from Michael Carter, one link closer to the place in the mountains where a woman could disappear forever. And for 2 weeks the chain kept holding. From the farmhouse in Ohio to a house in Indiana. From Indiana to a small town in Illinois. Woman to woman, house to house, always on back roads, always hidden, always one careful step at a time. And with every mile, Emily felt herself changing. Felt the frightened girl who had climbed over a wall, hardening into someone new. Someone who could read a room, who could spot a watcher, who could lie without a flicker. Who kept her cash in 3 different places and never slept in the same posture twice, and always knew where the back door was. She was becoming Sarah Miller. Not just wearing the name, becoming her. A woman with no past, no friends, no history. Just a growing belly and a fierce, quiet determination to reach the mountains. And the baby grew. The pains never came back. By the time she reached Illinois, she could feel the first faint flutters of movement, and she would lie awake at night with her hands on her belly, feeling her child move, and she would whisper to it, "We're almost there, we're almost safe. Just a little further, baby. Just a little further, and no one will ever find us again." But 300 miles behind her and closing, something had changed that Emily did not know about and could not have imagined. Michael Carter had not stopped looking for her, but he had stopped hunting her. In the 2 weeks since St. Bridget's, Michael had done something that none of his men understood, something that made the older ones whisper that the boss had finally lost his mind. He had begun quietly, methodically to take apart his own empire. He had called in his lawyers, the clean ones and the dirty ones, and he had started moving money, selling operations, transferring territories, dissolving in a matter of weeks the criminal machine that 4 generations of Carters had spent a century building. Dominic had watched it happen with growing alarm, and finally one night in the warehouse, he could hold his tongue no longer. "Boss," he said, "the men are talking. They don't understand what you're doing. You're selling everything, the docks, the unions, the whole thing. Men are getting nervous. Men who get nervous do stupid things, and the other families, they smell blood, boss. They see Michael Carter dismantling his own empire, and they think you've gone soft or gone crazy, and either way they're circling. This is dangerous. This is the most dangerous thing you've ever done." And Michael, who was signing a paper that transferred a fortune out of the shadows and into the clean, taxed, legitimate world, did not even look up. "Let them circle," he said. "Let them take it. All of it. I don't want it anymore." He signed the paper and set down the pen. Do you know why she left? Dominic really left, not the note. The real reason. She left because she looked at our child and she saw this. All of this. The warehouse, the guns, the men, the fear. She saw the whole poisoned inheritance, and she decided her baby would be better off with nothing, with no name, than with all of this. And she was right. He looked up, finally, and his eyes were clear and calm in a way Dominic had never seen. "So I'm going to take it away. All of it. I'm going to burn it all down to the ground legally, permanently, so that when I finally find her, and I will find her, I'll be able to stand in front of her with empty hands and tell her the truth. Not, 'I'm sorry,' not, 'I've changed.' Words. She's heard 1,000 words. I'm going to stand in front of her with nothing, and I'm going to say, look at my hands. There's no empire in them anymore. There's no world for you to be afraid of. There's just a man, and you can take him or leave him, but at least now it's a real choice and not a woman choosing between a cage and the wilderness." Dominic stared at his boss, at the man he had followed for 15 years, and he understood finally that he was watching something he had never once expected to see. He was watching Michael Carter's fall in love, really fall in love for the first time at 41 years old, not with a beautiful thing he owned, but with a woman he had lost, and the falling was destroying everything he had ever been. And Michael was letting it, was helping it, was tearing himself down to the studs and calling it the only sane thing he had ever done. "And if she still says no," Dominic asked quietly, "you give up everything, you find her, you stand in front of her with empty hands, and she looks at you and says, 'It's too late, Michael. I can never forgive you. I can never trust you. Go away.' What then? You'll have nothing. No empire, no protection, no wife, no child, nothing." And Michael Carter smiled, a small, sad, real smile, the first real smile Dominic had seen on his face in 15 years. Then at least, he said, "She'll finally have gotten what she wanted, a world without me in it. And I love her enough now that I could almost be glad to give it to her." He picked the pen back up. "Now find me the next lead. Not to catch her, to reach her. There's a difference, and from here on out, it's the only difference that matters." 300 miles to the west in a farmhouse in Illinois. Emily Carter lay in a narrow bed with her hands on her growing belly, whispering to her child about the mountains, believing with all her heart that the man behind her was still the monster she had fled, never once dreaming that the monster was at that very moment taking himself apart piece by piece, trying to become something he had never been, for no other reason than the hope of one day standing before her with empty hands and being told one final time to go. It was in Illinois that the chain finally broke, and it broke not because Emily made a mistake, but because she made the most human choice of her life. She had been at the farmhouse for 4 days waiting for the next link, a woman who was supposed to come from Iowa and drive her further west, and the woman was late, days late, and Carol the widow grew nervous, and the nervousness spread to Emily, and in the long empty hours of waiting alone in a strange house in a strange state, 6 months pregnant now, and further from everyone she had ever loved than she had ever been in her life, Emily Carter did the one thing she had sworn on her baby's life she would never do. She thought about Rosa. She thought about her every day, of course. But this was different. This was a hunger. Because that morning, Emily had felt the baby kick, really kick hard enough to see it move under her skin. And her first thought, her very first thought before she could stop it was, I have to tell Rosa. Rosa would want to know. Rosa risked her whole life for this baby, and this baby just kicked, and the one person in the world who would understand what that means will never ever know. And the loneliness of that, the sheer unbearable weight of it pressed down on Emily until she could not breathe. She knew the rule. She knew it better than she knew her own new name. Do not contact anyone from your old life. She knew that Michael was watching Rosa, that a phone call, an email, a single letter could undo everything, could get them both killed. Ruth had told her, Agnes had told her, she had sworn it. But she also knew something else, something she had turned over in her mind 1,000 times during the long nights on the road. She knew that Rosa was in danger too, not from Emily reaching out, from Emily's silence. Because as long as Michael believed Rosa was the key to finding Emily, Rosa was valuable to him alive. But what if he stopped believing that? What if he decided the old cook was no longer useful, no longer worth watching, just a loose end who knew too much? What happened to loose ends in Michael Carter's world? Emily had watched a man die on a marble floor for knowing too much. So Emily convinced herself. She told herself the lie that every runner tells themselves, the exact lie Ruth had warned her about, and she told it so well that she almost believed it was wisdom instead of loneliness. She told herself that a single, careful, and traceable message, not to be reunited, just to let Rosa know she was alive and safe and free, would actually protect Rosa, would let the old woman stop worrying, would ease the terrible guilt Emily carried for what she'd cost her friend. She would not use a phone. She would not use her name. She would send a postcard, just a postcard with no return address, mailed from a town she was only passing through, with a few careful words that only Rosa would understand. What harm could a postcard do? A postcard could not be traced. A postcard was just paper. She was wrong. And some part of her knew she was wrong, even as she walked into the little drugstore in the nearest town and bought a postcard, a cheap one, a picture of a cornfield and a stamp and a pen. Some part of her heard Ruth's voice saying they just can't bear the loneliness and reached out just once, and that's how they get caught every single time. But she pushed the voice down because the loneliness was louder, and she sat in Carol's kitchen that night and she wrote, in careful printing that did not look like her own hand, the garden is growing, it will bloom in the spring. Thank you for the seeds. Do not water them, they are safe in the sun. Your friend. No name, no place, nothing anyone but Rosa could ever understand. The garden was the baby. Blooming in spring was the due date. Do not water them meant do not look for me, do not reach out, do not try to find me. Safe in the sun meant they were free. They were out. They had made it. It was a message that said everything and revealed nothing, and Emily read it over a dozen times and could not find a single thread that could be pulled, and she convinced herself finally that it was safe. The next morning, in a town 40 miles away that she was passing through with Carol on an errand, she dropped the postcard in a public mailbox on a random street corner, and she felt as it slipped from her fingers a rush of relief so profound it frightened her, and underneath the relief, very quiet, very cold, a whisper of dread that she refused to hear. The postcard traveled east for 4 days, and on the 5th day it arrived at the Carter estate on Long Island, where every piece of mail that came to the house passed first through the hands of Michael Carter's men, exactly as it had every single day since the night Emily disappeared. Dominic brought it to Michael himself. Michael was at the warehouse signing the last of the papers that dissolved the final piece of his empire, a man surrounded by the wreckage of everything his family had built, when Dominic walked in holding a cheap postcard with a picture of a cornfield on it, and his face was strange. Boss, Dominic said, you need to see this. Michael took it. He read the careful printing. The garden is growing. It will bloom in the spring. Thank you for the seeds. Do not water them. They are safe in the sun. Your friend. He read it twice. And then something moved across his face and he set down his pen and he stood up very slowly. It's her, he said quietly. It's from her to Rosa. We don't know that, boss. There's no name, no return address. It could be. It's her. Michael turned the card over, looked at the picture of the cornfield, then back at the message. The garden is growing. The baby's growing. It will bloom in the spring. That's the due date. She's telling Rosa the baby is due in the spring. Do not water them. Do not look for me. They are safe in the sun. His voice was barely above a whisper. She's telling her friend she's alive. That's all this is. It's a girl who couldn't bear the silence, telling the one person who loves her that she made it. He closed his eyes for a moment. God, Emily, you held out so long. Why couldn't you hold out just a little longer? Dominic watched him. The postmark Boss. It's from Illinois, a little town in Illinois. That's the closest we've been since Pennsylvania. If we move now, flood the area, check the visa. And Michael Carter looked at his oldest, most loyal man, and he said, No. Dominic stopped. Boss, I said no. Michael sat back down and he laid the postcard flat on the table in front of him, and he looked at it for a long moment at the careful printing, at the desperate, loving code of a lonely, frightened girl. Look at what she did, Dominic. She's 6 months pregnant alone, running for her life, and she risked everything to send an old woman a postcard that says, don't worry about me, I'm safe. She didn't reach out because she was weak. She reached out because she loves that woman, and she couldn't stand the thought of Rosa lying awake at night not knowing if she was alive or dead. He touched the edge of the card. That's the woman I married. That's the heart I nearly crushed to death in that house. And you want me to use it to hunt her down. I want you to find your child, Dominic said quietly. That's all I've ever wanted for you, boss. I want you to hold your kid. And that finally broke something loose in Michael Carter, and he put his face in his hands, this man who had ordered 100 deaths without blinking, and he stayed like that for a long time, and when he lifted his head, his eyes were wet. Then I have to do it right, he said. Don't you see, if I use this postcard to hunt her down, if I show up in some little Illinois town with a dozen men and corner her in a parking lot, I prove her right. Forever. She'll spend the rest of her life knowing that the one time she let her guard down, the one time she let herself love someone out loud, I used it to cage her. And that child will grow up hearing that story. How Daddy hunted Mommy down. How Daddy found her because she was foolish enough to send a postcard to a friend. He shook his head slowly. No, I'm not going to be the man in that story. Not anymore. He picked up the postcard and he held it out to Dominic. Give this to Rosa. Let her read it. Let her know the girl she loves is alive. She's earned that. And then take the men off Rosa. All of them. Permanently. That old woman never has to be afraid of me again. Dominic took the postcard and he stared at his boss and he said, Then how, boss? How do you ever reach her if you won't use the one thread you've got? And Michael Carter stood up and he looked around the warehouse at the last remnants of the empire he had spent 2 months destroying. And he said, There's only one way left. The hard way. The honest way. I finish this. I sell the last of it. I make myself into a man with clean hands and an empty name, a nobody, a man with nothing left to run and nothing left to protect. And then I stop chasing her. I stop looking. And I wait. And I let the world do what the world does. And I trust that a woman that good, that brave, that loving will not be able to hide forever. And one day, somehow, a door will open. And when it does, I'll be ready. Not with men, not with money, just with the truth. That's all I have left. That's all I want to have left. And so Michael Carter did the thing that no one who knew him would ever have believed possible. He stopped hunting his wife. He let the last thread fall from his fingers. And he finished dismantling his empire, and he went home to the great cold estate, and he waited. It took 3 more months. Emily reached the mountains in the early spring when the snow was still on the high peaks, but the valleys were turning green and the place at the end of the chain was everything Agnes had promised. A small town so remote and so quiet that the modern world seemed to have simply forgotten it existed. A community of women, some running like her, some who had run long ago and simply never left, all of them keeping each other's secrets. All of them living the big, loud, ordinary lives that Rosa had wished for her. There was a little clinic run by a doctor who asked no questions. There was a house with a room for Emily and a woman named Grace who ran it and became in time something almost like a mother to her. And there in that town in the mountains on a morning in late spring, exactly when the code on the postcard had promised Emily Carter, who was now truly and finally Sarah Miller, gave birth to a son. She named him Daniel. It meant God is my judge, and she chose it because it was a name with no history, a name from no family, a clean name for a clean life. And when they laid him on her chest, red and screaming and perfect, Emily looked down at him and she wept. And the first thing she said to him, The very first words her son ever heard were, "You're free. You were born free. No one will ever put you in a cage. I promise you. I promise you with my whole life." And for 3 months it was true. Daniel grew fat and happy in the mountain town. Emily healed. She got a job at the little clinic, keeping the books, and she made friends, real friends, and she began slowly to believe that she had actually done it, that she had actually built a life beyond Michael Carter's reach, that the running was finally truly over. And then on an ordinary afternoon in the middle of summer, everything she had built came within a hair's breadth of ending. It came not from Michael. Michael had kept his word, had called off every hunter, had let every thread go cold. It came from the one place no one had thought to guard against. It came from money, from the $5 million that Michael had never officially withdrawn because he had not wanted to signal to the world that he had stopped looking, and the bounty still lived out there in the underworld, like a rumor, like a ghost, in a man named Vance, a low, vicious bounty hunter who had been chasing that ghost for 6 months, had finally, through patience and cruelty and 100 greased palms, followed the same faint trail that Agnes had built her whole network to hide. He had found Ruth. He had frightened an address out of a link in the chain. And he had come to the mountain town alone, armed hungry for $5 million, not knowing and not caring that the man who had offered it no longer wanted the girl brought back in chains. Emily was walking home from the clinic with Daniel in a sling against her chest when she saw him. She saw him the way she now saw everything, with the hardened, watchful eyes she had learned on the road, and she knew the instant she saw him exactly what he was. A watcher, a hunter, a man who did not belong in this town, standing across the street, looking at her with the flat, hungry eyes she had spent 3 years learning to recognize on the men in her husband's house. Her whole body went cold. She turned calmly and she began to walk the other way, and behind her she heard his footsteps quicken, and she understood that this was it, that after everything, after the wall and the highway and the network and the mountains, it was going to end here on an ordinary street with an ordinary man over money. "Emily Carter," the man called out, and the sound of her old name, her real name, spoken aloud on that street for the first time in nearly a year, hit her like a bullet. "Don't run, Mrs. Carter. You'll only make it harder. There's a lot of people looking for you and a lot of money on your head, and I found you first. Let's do this the easy way." And Emily ran. She ran with her baby against her chest, ran for the only place she could think of, the clinic where there were people, where there were witnesses, and behind her, the man ran too faster, gaining, and she could hear him closing the distance. And she clutched Daniel tighter, and she prayed, and she ran, and she knew she was not going to make it. And just as she felt his hand close on her shoulder, just as she was jerked backward off her feet, a truck came around the corner of the street and stopped, and a man got out. And the man was Michael Carter. Emily would never for the rest of her life be able to fully explain the sound she made when she saw him. It was not a scream. It was something older than a scream, the sound of the deepest fear she had, the fear that had driven every mile of her flight, made real and standing in the street in front of her. He had found her, after everything. He had found her, and now there were two of them, the bounty hunter and the husband, and she was trapped between them with her son in her arms. And she thought, this is how it ends. This is how my baby's freedom ends. And she wrapped both arms around Daniel and turned her body to shield him, waiting for the worst. But the worst did not come, because Michael Carter did not look at Emily at all. He looked at the man holding her, the bounty hunter, and his face was a thing out of a nightmare, and his voice, when it came, was the calm, dead, terrible calm that Emily had heard once through a floor, while a man begged for his life. "Take your hand off my wife," Michael said. The bounty hunter Vance did not let go. He was greedy, and he was stupid, and he did not understand what he was looking at. "She's mine," he said. "I found her. The bounty's mine. 5 million, Carter. You want her, you can buy her back off me, but I found her fair," and he never finished the sentence. Michael Carter crossed the distance between them so fast that Emily barely saw it, and there was a sound, and the bounty hunter was on the ground, and Michael was standing over him, and Michael was not a man dismantling his empire anymore, was not a man with clean hands and an empty name, was for one terrible moment exactly what he had always been. And Emily looked away and pulled Daniel's face into her chest so the baby would not see. When it was over, the bounty hunter was alive, but he would never hunt anyone again. And Michael Carter stood up and he turned finally to face his wife, and the monster drained out of his face. And what was left was just a man exhausted and grieving, and terrified, standing 10 feet away from the woman he loved and the child he had never met. And then Michael Carter did the thing that Emily had never once in 3 years of marriage seen him do to any living soul. He knelt. He went down onto both knees in the dirt of the street. This man who had made kings and killers kneel to him, and he put his empty hands out in front of him, palms up, and he looked up at Emily with tears running openly down his face, and he said, "I'm not here to take you back. I swear it. I swear it on his life." He looked at the baby and his voice broke completely. "Is that him? Is that my son?" Emily could not speak. She held Daniel tighter, and she stared at her husband on his knees in the street, and every instinct she had screamed at her to run, but her legs would not move because there was something in his face that she had never seen before, and it froze her where she stood. "His name is Daniel," she finally whispered. "Daniel," Michael repeated, and he said it like a prayer, like the most sacred word in any language. "Daniel." He stayed on his knees. He did not come closer. "Emily, I know what I am. I know what I did to you. I know that I taught you to be so afraid of me that you climbed over a wall in the middle of the night, 6 weeks pregnant, and ran across the whole country with nothing, because you thought anything at all. Even that was better than raising our child in my world. And you were right. You were right about all of it." The tears fell. "So I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear me, and then I'll go if that's what you want, and I'll never come back, and I'll spend the rest of my money making sure no one like that man ever finds you again. But I need you to hear it first." "Michael, it's gone," he said. "All of it. Everything. The docs, the men, the money, the empire, the name, all of it. I've spent the last 4 months tearing it down to the ground. It's gone, Emily. There's nothing left of the world you ran from. I burned it. I burned it all down myself, brick by brick, everything 4 generations of my family built, everything I was ever taught to protect. It's gone." He held up his empty hands. Look at my hands. There's no empire in them. There's nothing left to be afraid of. There's just a man kneeling in the dirt who found out too late that the only thing he ever built that was worth anything was you, and he threw it away, and he'd give every dollar and every drop of blood he ever had for the chance to build it again the right way. And Emily stood there, and she looked at her husband on his knees at his empty hands, and she thought of the collar of diamonds, and she thought of the man on the marble floor, and she thought of a 9-year-old boy with a gun in his hand, and she said in a voice shaking with everything, "How do I know? How do I ever know it's real? You've lied to me for 3 years. You taught me to lie. How do I know this isn't just the biggest lie of all? To get me to come home so you can put me back in the cage." And Michael Carter looked up at her and he said the only thing that could have possibly answered that question. "You don't," he said. "That's the whole thing, Emily. You don't know. You can't know. There's no proof I could ever give you that would be enough because I'm the one who taught you that proof can be faked. So I'm not going to try. I'm not going to promise you anything because my promises are worthless and we both know it." He got to his feet slowly and he took a step back away from her, giving her room, giving her air. "I'm going to walk away right now. I'm going to get in that truck and I'm going to drive to the edge of this town and I'm going to stop at the little motel there and I'm going to sit in a room and I'm going to wait for 1 week. And in that week, I'm not going to send a single man to watch you or a single dollar to trap you. You'll be free, completely free. Freer than you've been since the day I met you." He wiped his face. "And at the end of the week, you can do one of 2 things. You can come to that motel with Daniel or without him on whatever terms you want. And we can try slowly, carefully with you holding all the power for once in your life to see if there's anything left worth saving. Or you can not come. And if you don't come, I'll leave and I'll wire everything I have left into an account in your name. And you and Daniel will never see me or hear from me again for as long as any of us live. That's the choice. And for the first time in your life, Emily, it's a real one. No walls, no bars, no cage. Just a door standing open and you on the free side of it deciding whether to walk through." And then Michael Carter turned and he walked back to his truck and he got in and he drove away to the edge of the town and he did not look back and he left his wife standing in the street with their son in her arms, and for the first time in 3 years, with her whole future entirely in her own hands. The week was the longest of Emily's life, and it was in some ways harder than the running had been because the running had been simple, and this was not. She did not go to the motel. Not the first day or the second or the third. She went about her ordinary life in the mountain town. She worked at the clinic. She fed Daniel and rocked him to sleep, and she waited to feel Michael's men closing in, waited for the trap to spring, waited for the proof that it had all been another lie. But the men never came. The trap never sprang. Day after day, she was free, completely free, exactly as he had promised. And every day that passed without the cage closing was in its own quiet way the only proof he could ever have given her. On the fourth day, she talked to Grace, the woman who had become like a mother to her, and she told her everything, and Grace listened, and at the end she said, "I can't tell you what to do, honey. Nobody can. But I've been running my whole life from a man too, and I'll tell you the one thing I've learned. There's a difference between a man who won't let you go and a man who lets you go and prays you'll come back. The first one is a cage. The second one is just love, and love is a risk, and it's the only risk in this whole world that's ever once been worth taking. You have to decide which kind of man is sitting in that motel. But I'll tell you this, a caged bird doesn't get to choose, and that man just handed you the key and walked away. That's not nothing, honey. In this world, that's just about everything." On the seventh day, the last day, Emily Carter put her son in his sling against her chest, and she walked to the edge of town to the little motel, and she stood outside the door of the room where her husband had waited alone for a week, asking nothing, watching, no one, just waiting. And she raised her hand to knock, and she stopped. And in that moment, standing outside that door, Emily understood that whatever she chose in the next few seconds would be truly the first free choice of her entire adult life. She could turn around, she could walk away and take the money and raise Daniel in freedom and never see this man again. And it would be a good life, a safe life, and no one in the world would blame her, or she could open the door. And she thought about the man on his knees in the dirt with his empty hands. And she thought about the empire he had burned to the ground, not to trap her, but to free her. And she thought about a whole week of freedom, unwatched, unhunted, a door standing open. And she thought about the difference Grace had named between a man who won't let you go and a man who lets you go and prays. And she opened the door. Michael was sitting on the edge of the bed, and when the door opened, he stood up fast and he saw her, and he saw Daniel against her chest, and he did not move toward them, did not reach for them, just stood there with his hands at his sides, waiting, letting her be the one to close the distance, or not letting it be, to the very last inch, her choice. "I want to be clear about something," Emily said, and her voice was steady, and it was the voice of a woman who held all the power in the room and knew it. "I did not come back to you. Do you understand? I am not your wife anymore. I am not Emily Carter. That woman is dead, and she is staying dead. My name is Sarah, and my son's name is Daniel, and we have a life here, a free life, and we are not giving it up. If there is going to be anything between us, it happens here in the light, on my terms, at my pace, and the very first time I see the cage start to close again, I will vanish so completely that not even you will ever find me. Is that understood?" "Yes," Michael said. "God, yes, all of it. Whatever you want, forever." "You will earn him," Emily said, and she looked down at Daniel. "This boy, you do not get him because you're his father. Blood means nothing. You get him one day at a time by being a man he can be proud of, and the day you stop being that man is the day you lose him forever, and there is no empire on earth big enough to buy him back. Is that understood?" "Yes," Michael said, and he was weeping again, but this time it was something else entirely. And Emily Carter, who was now and forever Sarah, took one step into the room, and then another, and she crossed the distance that a whole country and a whole year of terror had opened between them. And she stopped in front of her husband, and she looked up at him, and she made her choice fully and freely, and with her eyes wide open. "Then we can try," she said, "slowly, carefully, as two free people, and you can meet your son." And she reached up and she folded back the edge of the sling, and she showed Michael Carter his sleeping child, and Michael looked down at the tiny face of the boy he had crossed the country to find, and then set free the son he had dismantled, an empire to deserve, and he reached out one trembling finger, and he touched the baby's small warm hand, and Daniel's tiny fingers closed around it in his sleep, the way babies do. And Michael Carter feared across the whole eastern seaboard. The man who had made killers kneel fell to pieces, completely silently, gratefully, in a cheap motel room at the edge of the world. They did not fall back into the old life. There was no old life to fall back into because Michael had burned it down, and Emily would not have taken it if there were. What they built instead was something slower and smaller and infinitely harder and infinitely more real. He stayed at the motel for a month, and then he took a small house at the other end of town, and he courted his own wife the way he should have the first time, with patience and honesty and no diamonds and no threats and no walls. He got the job. Michael Carter, who had commanded an empire, learned to fix engines at the town garage, and he came home with grease under his fingernails instead of blood, and slowly, so slowly, Emily began to let him closer. It took years for her to trust him. Some part of her she knew would never fully stop watching the door. But she watched it less and less, and one day she realized she had gone a whole month without watching it at all, and she understood that something in her had finally quietly healed. Daniel grew up in that mountain town, and he grew up free exactly as his mother had promised him on the day he was born. He grew up with a yard and a mom and a school with a slide out front and a father who taught him to fix engines and throw a ball and tell the truth, and who never once, not for a single day of that boy's whole life, put anything in his hand that could hurt another living soul. The 9-year-old boy with a gun, the poisoned inheritance that had haunted 4 generations of Carters, died in the dirt of that street the day Michael Carter knelt down and opened his empty hands. It did not pass on. Emily had made sure of that. She had run across an entire country to make sure of that, and she had won. And Rosa, Emily kept her promise and never contacted her for 3 long years. But when at last the danger was truly gone, when Michael himself confirmed that the Watchers were gone and the bounty was dead and the past was buried, Emily wrote her one more message, and this time it was not in code, and this time it had a return address, and it invited an old woman with flour in the creases of her hands to come and live in a mountain town and meet a little boy named Daniel and grow old surrounded by the family she had saved. And Rosa came, and she wept when she held the child, and she wept harder when she saw the man Michael Carter had become, and she stayed for the rest of her life, and she was, until the day she died, the most beloved grandmother that boy ever had. Emily Carter had climbed over a wall in the dark, 6 weeks pregnant, with nothing but a bag of cash and a false name and a mother's ferocious, unkillable love. And she had run across an entire country, hunted by the whole American underworld, to give her child one single thing: a life without a cage. And in the end, she did not just win that life for her son. She won it for herself, and most impossibly of all, she won it for the man she had fled, who followed her not to drag her back, but to lay his empire down at her feet and beg with empty hands for the only thing he had ever truly wanted, which was not to own her, but to be worthy of standing beside her as she stood free. She had run from a mafia king, and she had come home on her own terms in her own time to a mechanic with grease under his nails and their son on his shoulders. And she had chosen him freely, not because she had to, but because at long last she wanted to. And that was the whole of it, not a woman captured, a woman who walked of her own free will through an open door and closed it gently behind her, and was never, for the rest of her long and ordinary and beautiful life, afraid of anything ever again.